Night is falling over enemy country, and the Roman army is still working. The men have already marched since morning beneath a weight that has bent their shoulders. Raw, shield, helmet, food, cloak, cooking vessel, stakes, tools, spare clothing, weapons, and whatever private fragments of home a soldier is still stubborn enough to carry. Their feet have pounded dust into their sandals and sweat into the leather straps. Their mouths are dry. Their backs ache, somewhere beyond the fading light. Hostile riders may be watching from a ridge, waiting for the column to loosen, waiting for darkness to make it vulnerable. Yet there is no collapse into sleep, no scattering of men beside fires, no grateful dropping of packs with the day's labour finished. The moment the order comes, the exhausted soldiers begin to dig. Ditches must be cut, earth must be thrown inward to form a rampart, stakes carried through the march must become a defensive wall, entrances must be measured, tents aligned. Sentries assigned, baggage secured, animals placed, cooking begun, weapons inspected. Only when the army has built a small fortified town out of darkness and soil may a legionary eat, clean himself as far as circumstances allow, and lower his body onto the ground. Even then, his rest belongs only partly to him. Before dawn, a horn will sound, the camp will be dismantled, and the road will take him again. This is the part of Rome's military power that later legend often hides behind shining helmets and red cloaks. The Roman soldier is remembered in the instant of combat, shield braced, sword stabbing beneath an enemy's ribs, standards rising through smoke. But armies do not become terrifying only because they fight well. They become terrifying because they can arrive where they are not expected, survive what others cannot, build protection where none exists, and repeat the same punishing routine until an opponent begins to feel that Rome is not merely sending men, but extending a hard, disciplined landscape across the world. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the real story is not that Roman soldiers were monsters. The real story is how a state trained ordinary human bodies to perform as though pain, fatigue, fear, and distance were problems that could be organised away. On a campaigning day, the transformation begins with movement. A legionary does not usually stride into history fresh, rested, and ready for the dramatic clash preserved in paintings. He approaches battle after weeks or months of routine punishment, waking before the sun, packing and unpacking, marching through heat or rain, crossing rivers, climbing slopes, swallowing dust kicked up by the men ahead, eating coarse grain prepared under conditions that make every meal a small piece of labour. The image of the Roman soldier carrying nearly his entire life upon a pole over his shoulder is not merely decoration for a museum display. Roman campaigning depended on men able to transport significant loads themselves, reducing the army's dependence on long, vulnerable baggage trains. Ancient descriptions and modern experiments cannot give one perfect universal weight for every soldier on every campaign, because equipment, era, supply conditions, and individual assignments vary. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives in the record suggests a truth more important than an exact number. These men were expected to march heavily burdened and still be capable of fortifying, standing guard, and fighting at the end of the road. The road itself is rarely merciful. In Italy, there are steep hills, winter rain, summer glare, mud that sucks at the sandals and turns carts useless. Beyond Italy, the conditions widen into a catalogue of misery. In Spain, soldiers grind through rocky uplands and ambush country. In North Africa, thirst and glare punish every mistake in supply. In Gaul, rivers swell, forests conceal movement, and rain works through wool and leather until the entire camp smells of wet animal hide. On eastern frontiers, heat can give way to bitter cold, and open country exposes marching troops to cavalry that may strike and vanish before infantry can answer. Roman roads eventually help bind the empire together, but many Roman armies must operate before a convenient paved route exists. Soldiers cut paths, repair crossings, drag wagons from ruts, carry materials, and force their own progress through landscapes that resist them. A Roman legion is not simply walking across the world. Very often, it is having to remake a narrow strip of that world in order to pass through it. And then, at the end of such a day, comes the camp. To modernise, this may appear almost absurd. Why make men who are already exhausted dig and build every evening? Why not trust numbers, scouts, or a ring of guards? The answer lies in the Roman understanding of danger. Armies are fragile when they stop moving. Men wander in search of water, animals panic, food is distributed, armour comes off, officers lose sight of units. A force that is disciplined on the march can become a confused crowd after sunset. A fortified camp transforms that vulnerability. It gives every man a position, every unit a place, every cart and animal an ordered space. It imposes shape on fatigue. It forces even the exhausted army to remain, in some sense, an army. The exact design of Roman marching camps changes through time and circumstance. Not every ditch is identical. Not every camp is laid out like a perfectly stamped diagram. Terrain matters, hurry matters, enemy proximity matters. Archaeologists sometimes identify temporary camps only through faint lines in the earth, shallow surviving ditches, scattered hobnails, fragments of equipment, or the pattern of a defensible enclosure glimpsed from the air. Many camps vanish completely, ploughed flat or covered by later life. Yet the repeated practice is unmistakable. Roman forces have an unusual habit of enclosing themselves, even for brief stays, turning an open campsite into an engineered position. This is one reason enemies may find them so infuriating. A Roman army can move into hostile territory and, before the night is over, surround itself with earthworks difficult to rush and costly to assault. The enemy sees tired men, then, hours later, he sees a wall. For the soldier kneeling in the dirt, there is nothing romantic about it. His hands are blistered beneath calluses already thick from training and marching. He uses a pick or shovel, moves soil, hauls timber, plants stakes, clears stones. His shield, which later generations imagine lifted only in heroic formation, has rubbed against him all day. His helmet has trapped heat around his skull. His armour has pressed on shoulder and collarbone. A sandal stud may have loosened. A strap may have bitten through skin. Around him, thousands of men perform comparable labour, and the sound is less like a battlefield than a vast building site metal cutting earth. Officers calling instructions, pack animals shifting, men coughing dust, wooden stakes hammered into place. The violence of Rome begins here, not in the flash of blades, but in repetition. It begins in the conviction that the body may protest, but the task remains. Roman discipline becomes especially powerful because the camp is not only defensive, it is psychological. Inside its perimeter, men know where they belong, the standards are placed, the commander occupies his position, units recognise their streets, their tents, their boundaries. A soldier who has marched into unknown land can lie down within an arrangement that feels familiar because he has made it again and again. The enemy may alter, the climate may worsen, the countryside may grow stranger. But the camp carries a fragment of Rome wherever the army goes. It is a portable order, built every evening by men who are also being shaped by it. A recruit who once finds digging after a march unbearable may discover, months later, that he reaches automatically for his tools. Not because it has ceased to hurt, but because there is no longer any expectation that pain will excuse him. This is where the popular phrase trained like monsters needs care. Roman soldiers are not invulnerable. They become sick, terrified, mutinous, demoralized, hungry, wounded, frostbitten, dehydrated, and sometimes defeated with appalling loss of life. Ancient authors often admire discipline because its failure is so catastrophic. An army trapped without supplies does not survive merely by being Roman. A legion surprised in bad terrain can be shattered. Men driven too hard may revolt. Commanders make mistakes, soldiers panic, the machine breaks. Scholars still debate how consistently the ideal routines described by Roman writers were carried out in every campaign, especially when the evidence comes from authors who wish to praise old-fashioned toughness or criticise the softness of their own age. But ideals matter when thousands of men are punished, rewarded, promoted, fed, and judged according to them. Rome builds military expectations severe enough that even imperfect obedience can produce extraordinary results. A lesser-known sign of this severity lies underfoot. Roman military sites have yielded enormous numbers of tiny iron hobnails from military footwear, sometimes scattered along routes or clustered where men laboured, rested, or lost equipment. They seem insignificant beside fort walls and helmets, but they bring the marching soldier close. Those little nails held together the sandals that carried Roman armies through mud, stone, streets, mountain tracks, fort courtyards, siege lines, and graveyards. They also wore loose, fell free, and remained behind when the men moved onward. An empire famous for marble monuments and triumphal arches can also be traced through the lost metal studs of aching feet. It is an unglamorous relic of conquest, and perhaps for that reason one of the most honest. By darkness, the camp has settled into guarded stillness. Smoke rises low from cooking fires. Some men grind grain or prepare whatever ration remains available. Some mend straps, scrape dirt from equipment, or try to dry clothing that will not be fully dry by morning. Others stand watch beyond the warmth of their companions, peering into fields and trees where anything might be waiting. The protection of the rampart does not remove fear. It organises fear. It gives it a boundary and a sentry schedule. Within the enclosure are men from different regions, men who enlisted for pay, survival, citizenship, status, family tradition, ambition, or because few better choices existed. Some are young enough that the army is the first great structure to claim them. Some have already seen villages burned and friends vanish under spears. None is superhuman. That is what makes the routine more unsettling. Rome does not need them to be born monstrous. It needs them to rise when ordered. Before dawn, movement begins again. Tents come down. Cooking vessels are packed. The standards are raised. Men who slept badly stand in ranks because sleep is not the measure by which duty is assigned. Behind them remains the temporary scar of their presence ditch. Rampart, trampled earth, ashes, broken straps, perhaps a lost hobnail pressed into soil. Ahead lies another day of marching, and perhaps another camp, or perhaps the moment when the enemy finally chooses to strike. If battle comes, Roman soldiers will not enter it untouched by the journey. They will fight carrying yesterday's fatigue in their legs and the morning's weight in their shoulders. Their strength is not that hardship has vanished. Their strength is that hardship has been made ordinary. Long before Rome rules shorelines, deserts, forests, river valleys, and mountains far beyond the city where its story begins, this is the principle that quietly prepares its advance. An enemy may defeat a Roman army in one field, ambush it in one valley, or force it bleeding from one frontier, but to stop Rome entirely, he must overcome not just men with swords, but men trained to turn marching into endurance, endurance into labour, labour into defence, and defence into the confidence to continue. The fortified camp in the night is therefore more than a resting place. It is the first glimpse of the mechanism that will carry Rome outward, one exhausted body at a time, until the sound of digging in the dark becomes as threatening as the sight of weapons in daylight. The men who dig that camp in enemy soil are the heirs of a much older Rome, a Rome that does not yet command distant provinces or send legions beneath foreign skies. Long before an imperial army can raise a fortified enclosure at the edge of the world, there is a small community beside the Tiber surrounded by rival settlements, disputed farmland, low hills, marshes, tracks, pasture, and the constant possibility of violence arriving from places close enough to see. Rome does not begin as a machine of conquest fully formed. It begins in the crowded, dangerous world of central Italy, where fighting is seasonal, local, personal, and often bound to land. The earliest Roman warrior is not yet the familiar legionary of later centuries. He is more likely a land-holding citizen who fights because the community expects him to defend the fields that support his household, and because victory can mean more land, more livestock, more security, and more standing among other men. He does not belong to a professional barracks world. He belongs to a farm, a family, a neighbourhood, a web of obligations. Yet inside this modest beginning lies something that will become far larger than anyone standing on those early hills could have imagined the Roman habit of turning military service into a civic structure, and civic structure into power. The beginnings are difficult to see clearly. Rome's earliest centuries are wrapped in later storytelling, family tradition, patriotic reconstruction, and legend shaped long after the events it claims to describe. Ancient Romans told stories of kings, champions, betrayals, heroic last stands, sacred geese, and warriors so devoted that they sacrificed themselves for the state. Some memories may preserve genuine shadows of early conflict, others serve the values later Romans wish to celebrate. Archaeology confirms that communities in the region grew, traded, fortified themselves, and fought in a world influenced by Latin neighbours, Sabines, Etruscans, and Greek colonies farther south. But no surviving document lets historians stand beside Rome's first army and record exactly how it formed. The evidence remains incomplete. What can be seen is a city slowly learning that survival in Italy depends not only on courage, but on the ability to summon men, arrange them, equip them according to means, and make individual households fight as parts of one public body. In many early societies, warfare is inseparable from status. A wealthy man can afford stronger protection, a better shield, perhaps a horse. A poorer man carries what he can obtain. Rome is no exception. Military obligation becomes tied to property because property determines what kind of equipment a citizen can provide for himself, and because men with land are thought to have a direct stake in the community's survival. This is not equality beneath the eagle. It is a system built upon rank, resources, and duty. Those who possess more are expected to bear heavier military responsibility, while those with little or nothing occupy a weaker political and martial position. In the early republic, the army reflects the society that produces it, ordered, unequal, competitive, and deeply suspicious of any man who stands outside obligation to the community. At first, the fighting style associated with wealthier infantry may have shared much with the heavily armed warfare spreading through the Mediterranean world, close-ranked men carrying large shields and thrusting spears, advancing as a compact front rather than as scattered warriors seeking private glory. The famous Greek hoplite line is not simply copied in one neat moment by Rome, and scholars still debate exactly how early Roman formations worked and how strongly Etruscan and Greek influences shaped them. But the wider shift matters. A warrior society centered on aristocratic display begins to make room for something colder and more collective. In a dense infantry formation, the man beside a soldier matters almost as much as the soldier himself. A magnificent warrior who breaks formation to pursue fame can become a danger. A less glamorous man who stays in place, holds his shield correctly, maintains pressure, and does not flee may be far more valuable. That principle runs against the kind of history people love to remember. Individual heroes are easy to name. They stand on bridges, capture standards, face enemy champions, and become the subjects of stories told for generations. Collective discipline is less dazzling. It is thousands of men standing close enough to smell one another's fear, obeying orders, keeping alignment, stepping forward when the ground is uneven and missiles are falling. Early Rome certainly celebrates personal bravery. Its later traditions are full of extraordinary individual acts, some plausible, some embroidered, some almost certainly shaped by moral lesson rather than strict report. But Rome's lasting advantage does not come from producing a supernatural class of duelists. Many peoples in Italy are brave, many fight fiercely, many possess proud warrior traditions. Rome's more consequential talent is its slow construction of systems that can absorb bravery, channel it, punish its failures, reward its usefulness, and replace fallen men with new ranks drawn from an expanding citizen body. That expansion is neither peaceful nor inevitable. The young republic is surrounded by opponents who understand war perfectly well. Latin communities resist Roman domination. Volsci and Equi become recurring threats in later Roman memory. Etruscan cities possess wealth, organisation, and deep traditions of their own. The mountain peoples of central and southern Italy are not primitive obstacles waiting for civilization to arrive. They are skilled fighters shaped by difficult terrain. local alliances, and forms of warfare that can expose the limits of a rigid army. For Rome, early warfare is not a parade of effortless victories. It is a grind of raids, reprisals, contested alliances, humiliations, recoveries, sieges, broken agreements, and renewed mobilization. At times, Rome's own later accounts probably tidy this chaos into a more flattering sequence. Nevertheless, the broad pattern is clear. The city survives repeated conflict, grows through it, and repeatedly draws conquered or subordinate communities into military relationships that eventually increase the strength available for further wars. This is one of the strange engines of Roman rise. Victory does not always mean simply destroying the enemy and leaving a wasteland behind. Rome can punish harshly, confiscate land, enslave captives, eliminate resistance, and display a brutality ordinary for the ancient world but no less terrible for being common. Yet it also develops ways of incorporating defeated communities, extending different levels of rights, demanding troops, founding colonies and strategic positions, and binding other Italians into a network that feeds Roman manpower. The system is uneven and resented. It provokes rebellion as well as cooperation. But over time it allows Rome to lose armies and still return with more men. One town's defeat becomes tomorrow's levy. One conquered road becomes the path for another campaign. Military organization begins to extend beyond the battlefield into the political geography of Italy itself. The soldier within this growing system is not yet the long-service professional of later imagination. Campaigning remains shaped by agricultural rhythms and civic demands. A citizen called to fight must leave crops, animals, debts, family labour, and local concerns behind him. A short war may be manageable. Long campaigns place tremendous strain on households, as Roman operations reach farther from home. The old assumption that men can fight briefly and return to their fields becomes increasingly difficult to sustain. This tension will eventually cut deeply into Roman society, but in the earlier centuries it already reveals the price of the city's ambition. An army made from citizens is not free merely because it does not yet resemble a salaried imperial force. Every man standing in formation represents work not being done elsewhere, anxiety waiting at home, and a household whose survival may depend on what happens under a shield wall many miles away. The great adaptation traditionally associated with Rome's struggles in Italy is a shift toward a more flexible legionary arrangement, often linked to wars against the Samnites in the 4th and early 3rd centuries before the Common Era. The Samnite world is one of mountains, upland valleys, narrow approaches, and difficult ground very different from an open field suited to a dense, continuous spear line. Later sources describe Roman armies organised into smaller tactical units, commonly called maniples, arranged in depth rather than locked into a single heavy front. The familiar picture shows younger men forward, experienced men behind them, and older veterans held as a final reserve, with gaps and intervals allowing greater flexibility. Historians argue over the precise date, pace, and causes of this development. Roman military systems may not have changed all at once after one humiliating encounter in rough country, and later writers may have simplified an evolution that was gradual and uneven. Still, the basic significance is hard to miss. Rome becomes known not merely for enduring punishment, but for changing when existing methods fail. There is no more unsettling quality in an enemy than the ability to survive a lesson. Rome can be defeated. In the Caudine Forks, according to the Roman tradition, an army trapped by the Samnites in 321 before the Common Era is forced into a humiliating surrender, passing beneath a yoke as a visible sign of submission. The precise embellishments of the account are debated, as with so much early Roman history, but Rome's wars against the Samnites are unquestionably severe and dangerous. A lesser state might have been broken by repeated reverses against capable enemies in hostile terrain. Rome instead continues, alters alliances, raises more forces, improves its strategic reach, and returns. The quality that later makes Roman armies seem monstrous is already emerging here. It is not invincibility. It is the ability to endure the shame of not being invincible, then organise another attempt. The more flexible legion is an expression of that mindset. In the older image of a solid mass of heavy infantry, strength comes from density and stability. In the developing Roman system, strength increasingly also comes from depth, replacement, and controlled movement. Men fight not simply as one wall, but as lines able, at least ideally, to support one another. The youngest and least proven do not stand alone. More experienced soldiers remain behind. The reserve is not an admission of weakness, but a recognition that battle changes shape. The first pressure may not decide it. Men grow exhausted. Ground breaks formations apart. Panic travels. A fresh line can restore what is failing, or turn an enemy's near success into disaster. Ancient battle never functions with the smooth precision of a diagram, and Roman formations in smoke, dust, noise, uneven terrain, and terror would have been far messier than the clean models drawn centuries later. Yet even a partially effective system of depth and support gives Rome options that depend less on one glorious impact and more on sustained control. This changes the idea of courage. A warrior's courage may once have been displayed by rushing forward farther than anyone else, wearing conspicuous equipment, or proving himself before watching companions. Roman military culture does not entirely erase that appetite for honour. Awards for valour, public recognition, and competition for status remain powerful forces. But courage becomes increasingly tied to reliability. The man who remains in rank after those beside him fall is courageous. The man who answers the signal rather than his own anger is courageous. The unit that holds long enough for support to arrive is courageous. The reserve that waits while hearing the screaming in front of it, then advances when summoned, is courageous. Rome is slowly teaching men that the state values bravery most when it is useful. A surprising part of Roman success is that even its celebrated battlefield structure cannot be separated from administration. Men must be sorted, weapons must be available, standards must identify units, officers must know where groups belong, signals must carry amid noise, allies must be summoned and integrated into plans, camps, roads, supplies, and colonial outposts must support movement across widening distances. An army's violence is only its visible edge. Behind each thrust of a spear or short sword lies the far less dramatic work of classification, obligation, record, command, and habit. Rome does not conquer Italy because every Roman body is tougher than everybody standing against it. It conquers because, increasingly, a Roman defeat leaves behind an institution capable of learning, recruiting, reorganizing, and applying pressure again. By the early 3rd century before the Common Era, Rome has become the dominant power in much of Italy. Although domination is never as simple as later triumphal narratives pretend, many communities cooperate because circumstances require it, rather than because they love Rome. Military obligations fall heavily upon allies. Resentments remain alive beneath apparent unity. But the wars have altered the character of Roman force. The city no longer relies only on nearby farmers answering a short emergency. It possesses a broadening pool of manpower, colonies positioned like locked gates along important routes, roads that help armies move and authority travel, and formations built to operate across different landscapes against different enemies. A people once concerned with survival in its immediate neighbourhood now has soldiers facing towards seas and territories beyond Italy. They are still human beings. They fear wounds, grieve losses, resent burdens, and can break under pressure. They are not yet the hardened professionals who will march for emperors along the Rhine or Euphrates. But a line has been crossed. Rome has begun to understand that the most dangerous army is not the one filled with the loudest heroes. It is the one that makes each man part of something able to outlast him. One citizen falls, another is summoned, one formation buckles. Another line advances, one campaign ends badly, a new levy assembles, one enemy believes Rome has been beaten, only to find Roman standards returning over the same road. The camp built after a punishing march is still centuries away from its most familiar imperial form, yet its logic is already present in this early transformation. Order is stronger than impulse, repetition is stronger than spectacle, a community that can turn landholders into ranks, ranks into flexible formations, defeats into adaptations, and conquered neighbours into further manpower has begun to create a kind of weapon far larger than any blade. Rome's soldiers do not become feared because they cease to be men. They become feared because the city learns how to place ordinary men inside a structure that keeps moving, when individual courage, exhaustion, or death should have stopped it. By the time Rome's armies begin to look beyond the Italian peninsula, the transformation of the fighting man is no longer only a matter of formation. A deeper change has begun, one that reaches into identity itself. A Roman citizen may still think of himself as a farmer, craftsman, son, husband, debtor, landowner, or ambitious young man seeking honour. But the moment he is called into military service, those private definitions must yield to a far more demanding reality. The army does not merely need his presence, it needs his body, his time, his obedience, and eventually his instincts. It needs him to stop responding first as an individual and begin responding as a soldier. That shift is not created in one dramatic ceremony or in the first clash of shields. It is constructed through selection, oath, shame, repetition, and the steady stripping away of the ordinary freedoms that make civilian life recognisable. For much of Rome's republican history, military service is not entered in the manner of a modern recruit choosing a career at a recruiting office. Citizens eligible for service may be levied because the state requires men for war. Property, age, social position, previous service, and the scale of the crisis all shape who is summoned and how. In principle, military obligation belongs to citizenship itself, especially among those with sufficient property to equip themselves and defend the community whose benefits they share. In practice, the burden can be unequal, resented, evaded, manipulated, and intensified in emergencies. A man may have plans for a harvest, for a marriage, for repayment of a debt, or simply for survival through another year, and then discover that Rome has placed war ahead of all of them. The army begins by making a claim when the state calls. The individual is no longer entirely his own. The selection of men is therefore a political event as much as a military one. In later republican descriptions, recruits are assigned to legions in an ordered process overseen by magistrates and military officers. The goal is not simply to gather a crowd, but to distribute ages and experience so that one legion is not filled with raw youths, while another hoards proven fighters. A Roman army cannot afford to rely entirely on enthusiasm. Youth provides strength and energy. Older soldiers provide steadiness, scar tissue, and the knowledge of how quickly confidence disappears when missiles begin to strike. The best military institutions understand that a recruit does not become useful because he looks strong in a public square. He becomes useful when placed among men who know what obedience feels like under pressure. Physical selection, where it occurs, reflects the brutal practicality of ancient war. The ideal recruit is not chosen for beauty or theatrical bulk. He must be able to march, carry, dig, endure exposure, handle equipment, and remain capable after exhaustion. Later Roman military authors admire broad chests, strong shoulders, hard limbs, alert eyes, and men accustomed to outdoor labour. Such descriptions tell us something about Roman ideals, though not every soldier would have matched them. Armies in need of manpower are rarely able to accept only perfect bodies, and Rome's demands across centuries often forced compromises. Men vary in height, health, strength, nutrition, and experience. Some arrive from fields already hardened by labour. Others have never carried military loads through heat or sleet. Some are eager for pay or distinction. Others have been pushed into a duty they would gladly avoid. No single portrait describes them all. What matters is what happens once they stand inside the machinery of service. The decisive moment is the oath. To modern ears, an oath may sound ceremonial, a solemn statement spoken and then absorbed into paperwork and memory. For a Roman soldier, the military oath binds him to a world where disobedience is not merely poor behaviour but a violation of sacred and civic duty. Its forms change across Rome's long history, and the exact language known from later periods should not simply be projected backward into every earlier century. Yet the underlying meaning is consistent enough. The soldier pledges obedience to commanders and commitment to service, placing himself under rules far harsher than those governing ordinary life. Once sworn, he enters a community held together by more than wages or fear of enemies. He becomes a man whose failure can be framed as betrayal not only of officers and comrades, but of Rome and the gods who witness promises. This is one of the quiet secrets behind Roman discipline. An army can punish men for running, stealing, sleeping on watch, abandoning equipment, breaking ranks, or refusing orders. But punishment is strongest when soldiers believe their conduct carries moral weight. The man who deserts does not simply leave a difficult workplace. He abandons companions who may die because he is absent. He shames his unit. He breaks his oath. He places himself outside the ordered world that gives the soldier identity, food, protection, reward, and perhaps a future. Roman commanders understand that terror alone is insufficient. Men held only by terror look for opportunities to escape. Men bound by oath, pride, shared hardship, reward, and fear together can be made to endure far more. For the recruit, however, the early experience is likely less philosophical than physical. His civilian habits are about to collide with military time. A civilian chooses, within limits, when to eat, when to rest, how to pace his labour, whom to avoid, which discomforts can be postponed. A recruit discovers that almost every ordinary choice is narrowed. He rises at signals, he moves when ordered, he handles his equipment according to expectation, he trains when tired, stands guard when cold, accepts inspection, receives rations, joins labour details, maintains position in a group, and learns that a slow mistake can bring consequences not only upon himself, but upon the men around him. The army does not need his personal opinion on whether the day's demand is reasonable. Its power rests precisely on the elimination of negotiation at the moment action is required. There is something especially severe in the Roman expectation that a soldier must master mundane tasks as carefully as combat. An inexperienced man may imagine soldiering as a matter of courage in battle, hold a shield, face danger, strike hard, survive if fortune permits. Instead he encounters a life dominated by preparation. Weapons have to be kept fit for use, leather cracks if neglected, metal corrodes, sandals fail, grain has to be ground, tents must be raised and struck, latrines. Sentry positions, roads, water access, baggage arrangements, animals, trenches, stakes, watch rotations, orders, passwords, and marching alignments all matter. A recruit who dreams of proving courage soon finds himself judged on whether he can carry his portion, maintain his tools, arrive in his proper place, and avoid becoming a burden. Heroism, in the Roman military world, is built on a foundation of competence so repetitive that it barely appears in heroic stories. The clothing and equipment placed upon the soldier further alter how he moves through the world. Roman arms change greatly across the centuries, and the uniform image of identical legionaries in matching armour belongs partly to modern visual simplification. In different eras and contexts, equipment may be supplied, privately acquired, inherited, repaired, altered, mixed, or replaced. Even so, the soldier becomes visibly marked by military life. Shield, helmet, body protection, sword. Spear or javelin, belt fittings, cloak, pack, tools, and footwear announce that he now belongs to a profession of controlled violence. Even when service is still connected to civic levy rather than permanent career, the weight does more than burden him. It reshapes posture, it changes the way he rests, walks, eats, crosses a ditch, turns on uneven ground, and measures distance. A civilian sees a hill. A soldier wearing equipment sees the extra strain in every step and the tactical danger at the crest. One object carries particular force, the shield. It is protection, burden, symbol, and obligation. A soldier who drops a weapon may perhaps find another. A soldier who abandons his shield exposes not only himself, but the integrity of men near him. In close fighting, the shield is not a private wall. It is part of a shared arrangement of bodies. The recruit must learn to hold it when his arm trembles, to keep it useful when the man beside him stumbles. To resist the instinct to fling away heavy equipment when flight suddenly appears easier than standing. Roman stories of shame attached to discarded arms are part of a wider Mediterranean warrior ethic. But within Rome's developing military culture, the lesson is especially clear. A man's body is no longer judged only by whether it survives. It is judged by whether it remains useful to the formation. That usefulness extends to identity within the legion. Soldiers are organised into smaller units, placed beneath officers, linked to standards that provide a visible centre amid movement and confusion. To lose a standard is not a minor administrative embarrassment. It can be a wound to collective honour so severe that recovery becomes an obsession. Standards gather loyalty because a mass of men need something more immediate than the abstract name of Rome when dust fills the air and commands are hard to hear. The soldier does not fight beside the entire republic at once. He fights beside familiar men, beneath visible signs, under officers he knows, within a group whose approval and contempt can matter every day. This local belonging is one reason military transformation is so powerful. The state may claim a recruit, but his companions enforce the claim hour by hour. The new soldier quickly learns that humiliation can train as effectively as pain. He may be mocked for weakness, corrected for clumsiness, punished for carelessness, judged by veterans who have little patience for a man unable to manage his load or hold formation. Ancient sources tend to show military life from above, through commanders, campaigns, laws, punishments, and famous deeds. They rarely preserve the ordinary emotional experience of a frightened recruit trying not to appear frightened among hardened men. Yet human behaviour needs little imagination here. Every military community creates hierarchies of experience. Veterans remember their own first marches but may show no softness to those now stumbling through them. A recruit learns quickly that exhaustion is not private when others can see him fail. He also learns that the army can offer forms of belonging unavailable elsewhere. Rome's wars are cruel, and the military burden can be crushing. But it would be incomplete to imagine soldiers only as trapped victims of an institution. Service can provide pay, plunder, food, friendships, prestige, advancement, land hopes, citizenship advantages in later settings, and a sense of meaning powerful enough to outlast fear. A man of modest prospects may discover that the army values his reliability more than civilian society ever did. A soldier distinguished for courage can earn decorations and recognition visible to his community. A veteran may return with stories, scars, contacts, and expectations changed beyond repair. Some men suffer military life, some embrace it. Many likely do both at different moments. No single explanation fully accounts for why men continue to serve in armies that demand so much. Compulsion, ambition, comradeship, pride, desperation, habit, and survival all stand together. A lesser-known reality is that the transformation of recruits does not fall only on the men selected as full Roman legionaries. Rome's growing strength depends heavily on allied Italian troops, who often supply enormous numbers of infantry and cavalry alongside Roman citizens. Their labour, wounds, and deaths are essential to Roman victories, though later popular images tend to place the citizen legionary alone at the centre of the scene. These allied soldiers are also drawn into routines of campaigning, obedience, hardship, and risk. While not necessarily sharing equally in the political rewards of Roman power, for generations, Rome's war machine relies upon communities whose men bleed for a system that places Rome above them. The resentment within that arrangement will not disappear. Much later, it will erupt into one of the most dangerous wars the Republic ever faces. For the moment, however, the combined manpower of Rome and its allies gives the army depth that many opponents struggle to match. As campaigns lengthen and expand, the soldier's absence from civilian life becomes more than a temporary interruption. Years of repeated service can change a man even before the Republic formally develops the long-term professional patterns associated with later armies. The farm he left does not wait unchanged. Debt may deepen. Family members age or die. Land may suffer without sufficient labour. A soldier returns with habits formed under orders, perhaps with injuries, perhaps with loot, perhaps with nothing except survival and the knowledge that another levy may come. He may have become more valuable to Rome as a fighter, precisely while becoming less secure as the civilian he once expected to remain. This contradiction sits quietly beneath Roman expansion. The state grows stronger through military obligation, while some of the citizens carrying that obligation find their ordinary lives increasingly fragile. Within the ranks, the recruit is no longer truly new. He has learned the commands, the weight, the early blisters that harden into tougher skin, the small miseries of shared quarters and uncertain food, the smell of leather, sweat, animals, oil, iron, smoke, wet wool, and turned soil. He knows the sound of anger from an officer and the more dangerous silence of veterans when something has gone wrong. He has learned that the army can be careless with comfort, but exacting with obedience. He has sworn that his will is no longer the final authority over his own movement, and once he accepts that condition, whether eagerly or bitterly, Rome has obtained something more useful than an armed civilian. It has obtained a man beginning to respond before he thinks. A signal sounds, and he rises. An order comes, and he lifts the burden. A line forms, and he takes his place. A ditch waits, and he digs. Somewhere ahead, the army will test whether that obedience survives the shock of violence. But long before the first enemy appears through dust or mist, the decisive conquest has already begun. Rome has entered the recruit's daily life, claimed his body through duty, marked his conscience through oath, tied his pride to companions and standards, and taught him that exhaustion is not a reason to stop. The man who once belonged chiefly to his household now marches as part of an institution whose demands may follow him across Italy, across seas, and eventually across the known world. The oath takes a man from his former life, but the march begins to remake the body that has sworn it. At first, the change arrives as pain. The new soldier feels every strap, every hard edge of equipment, every uneven stone beneath the sole. His shoulders burn where the load bears down, his lower back tightens, his feet swell inside leather already warm with sweat. The shield seems to grow heavier mile by mile, though its weight has not changed. The helmet hangs or presses awkwardly depending on how it is carried. Food, tools, cloak, weapons, stakes, utensils, spare items, and whatever else has been assigned to him move with every step, tugging him slightly out of balance. Around him, experienced men do not look comfortable, because they are not. They simply know how to carry discomfort without letting it determine the pace. The recruit discovers one of the army's most merciless truths. A march is not judged by how badly one man hurts. It is judged by whether the column arrives. A Roman army on the move is not a collection of warriors wandering toward battle. It is an ordered body stretched across the road and landscape, with advance elements, surveyors or guides where available, officers, infantry units, allied troops, baggage animals, servants, engineers, animals for transport, and rear protection arranged according to conditions and risk. Its shape may change when danger is near, or when terrain forces it into a narrower line. In open country it can spread differently than in a defile, forest track, river crossing, or mountain approach. Dust rises from thousands of feet and hooves, settling into hair, eyes, nostrils, clothing, water vessels, food, and open wounds. Men in front disappear into its pale cloud. Men behind breathe what the first ranks have disturbed. Commands must travel along a column far longer than any battlefield painting suggests. One stalled cart, one frightened animal, one collapsed bridge. Or one rumour of an enemy nearby can tighten nerves through the entire moving host. The Roman soldier is expected to endure this movement not as an emergency, but as routine. Ancient military writers preserve standards for marching practice and praise soldiers capable of covering impressive distances under load. Though exact distances in real campaigns must be treated carefully. Roads differ, weather differs, threat of battle, condition of the men, availability of water, baggage burden, and urgency of the commander all determine what can be done. Reports of extraordinary movement often survive precisely because they are extraordinary, or because a writer wishes to magnify a general's achievement. Scholars still debate how regularly armies reach the ideal pace celebrated in ancient accounts. Yet the underlying expectation is clear: Roman forces trained themselves to go farther, with more order and more equipment than opponents might comfortably believe possible. This mobility becomes a weapon before any spear is cast. A community hears that the Roman army is several days away, only to discover standards approaching sooner than expected. A commander prepares to defend one crossing and learns that the Romans have taken another. An enemy hopes rain, hunger, mountains, or distance will slow pursuit, and finds that the pressure has continued through conditions that should have bought time. A soldier does not need to understand the full strategy behind every punishing day. He only knows that one march becomes another, and that the miles dragged through his legs may be deciding the shape of a campaign long before he sees the men he has been sent to fight. The load matters because Roman mobility is not built entirely upon travelling lightly. A soldier capable of carrying much of what he needs gives commanders a force less helplessly tied to carts and animals. Baggage remains essential. No major army exists without supplies, animals, equipment, and support. But the more that individual infantrymen can transport, the more quickly parts of the army may manoeuvre, the less exposed it becomes to the loss of a single supply train, and the more prepared it is to halt, dig, cook, defend itself, and move again. The familiar marching pole with gear suspended from it, often associated especially with later Republican reform, embodies the principle even where details vary by period. The soldier carries not merely personal possessions, but a share of the army's ability to function when it stops. The burden upon his shoulders is part of Rome's independence in hostile country. There is a cruel efficiency in this. Every object carried by the soldier saves transport capacity elsewhere, but every object also consumes strength. A man who must fight after a heavy march reaches danger already drained. The army therefore depends upon the gradual conditioning of men to a level of fatigue that would overwhelm the unprepared. Muscles thicken, skin hardens, movement becomes economical. The veteran learns where equipment rubs and how to adjust it before a blister becomes crippling. He learns not to waste water too early, not to load himself carelessly, not to burn energy complaining when the column will not stop for complaint. He learns the rhythm of the man ahead, the danger of losing spacing, the relief of brief halts, and the bitter knowledge that removing a pack for a moment makes lifting it again seem almost worse. These are not grand lessons. They are the small practical knowledge by which armies remain alive. The feet suffer first and most constantly. Roman military footwear, especially the hobnailed sandal commonly called the caliga in much of the early imperial period, is one of the most intimate pieces of the soldier's world. It gives traction, durability, and a degree of repairability, but it does not make marching pleasant. Leather straps cut and chafe, hobnails wear down, loosen, fall free, or become treacherous on certain hard surfaces. Cold enters, mud enters, dust enters. Stones find exposed skin. In rain, leather darkens and softens. In heat, the foot swells and sweats. In winter, a man may feel the ground's cold through every hour of movement. A pair of sandals found at a fort or a trail of lost hobnails along a military route does not display the terror of war in an obvious way, yet it preserves the constant ordinary punishment beneath Roman expansion. Before an enemy's sword ever opens a soldier's flesh, the road has already been working on him. Sometimes the environment defeats equipment entirely. During operations in cold and wet northern provinces, soldiers accustomed to Mediterranean conditions must endure mud, sleet, flooded ground, raw wind, and long periods in garments that cannot properly dry. On the eastern frontiers, water becomes a controlling fact. Marching through heat while burdened with gear threatens not merely morale but life itself. A poorly timed movement or failed water supply can weaken an army before contact. In mountain country, the road climbs until thighs tremble and breathing turns shallow, then descends along paths where a slip beneath load can break a man or throw the column into confusion. Even within Italy, familiar land offers no kindness when winter rain destroys tracks or summer heat shimmers across exposed ground. The empire's later map may look clean, its provinces shaded neatly around the Mediterranean, but the soldier experiences that map as slopes, riverbanks, marsh edges, freezing watches, salt sweat, cracked lips, wet blankets, insects, and the next rise that must be crossed. Hunger travels with him. Roman soldiers receive rations when supply functions, but food on campaign is rarely the effortless daily certainty suggested by the simple word ration. Grain must be carried, distributed, ground, mixed, cooked, or baked where possible. The soldier may handle the labour of turning hard kernels into an edible meal after spending the day in motion. Grain has advantages it stores better than many prepared foods and can sustain men when properly issued. But to a hungry, exhausted soldier, the evening work required before eating is another demand from an institution that never stops collecting effort. Alongside grain may come bacon, cheese, vegetables, oil, sour wine or vinegar mixtures, whatever can be procured, purchased, requisitioned, captured, or supplied according to period and circumstance. A successful commander thinks constantly about food, fodder, water, and routes, because martial courage cannot persuade an empty stomach indefinitely. Even a disciplined soldier weakened by hunger becomes slower, sicker, angrier, and far more willing to listen when mutiny begins to find a voice. Yet hunger can also be deliberately used to create hardness. Roman admiration for austerity runs deep. Later writers repeatedly contrast an older ideal of soldiers satisfied with plain rations, hard labour, and stern discipline against the supposed luxury and decay of their own times. Such moralising must be handled cautiously. Authors often use the army as a mirror for broader complaints about society. Soldiers in no century enjoy privation simply because moralists admire it. Still, the military culture praises the man who can eat simply, sleep roughly, march heavily, and remain obedient. This ideal is not decorative. It shapes rewards, punishments, stories of admired commanders, and the way soldiers measure one another. A man able to tolerate little food and much labour is valuable. A man who needs comfort before usefulness is dangerous to everyone around him. The weather is an enemy without intentions, which may make it worse. It cannot be frightened, negotiated with, surprised, bribed, or driven away by victory. Rain turns packed ground to mud and ditches to brown water. It increases the weight of cloaks and tents, damages provisions, interferes with fire, and makes sleep a contest between exhaustion and cold. Heat draws water from the body faster than supply can always replace it. Sun on metal and leather becomes its own punishment. Wind can fill eyes and mouths with grit or turn exposed camps into places of misery. Snow hides paths and stiffens fingers. The Roman army's answer is not immunity. Men die from exposure, disease, thirst, and exhaustion, as armies always have. The answer is preparation enforced through command-carrying equipment, maintaining order, selecting campsites, gathering supplies, constructing shelter, keeping units together, moving before conditions worsen, or simply requiring men to proceed despite the misery. Disease walks inside the column as silently as exhaustion. Crowded camps, contaminated water, poor sanitation, inadequate diet, wounds, insects, animal waste, wet clothing, and prolonged fatigue create conditions in which illness can spread faster than any enemy charge. Roman armies understand some practical measures of cleanliness and camp arrangement, particularly the value of ordered space, drainage, water access, and the removal of waste. Even though they possess no modern knowledge of microbes, but practical experience cannot abolish infection. A campaign can be damaged not only by a lost battle, but by fever carrying men away day after day. The military record favours battles and commanders. Sickness is often less dramatic in surviving narratives, reduced to a line describing an army weakened by disease. For the soldier, however, illness may be more frightening than an armed opponent. A sword offers one moment of danger. Fever can reduce a strong man slowly, far from home, while the army prepares to leave him behind or bury him beside a road no family member will ever visit. The soldier who remains healthy cannot pause for every fallen companion. The column must preserve its movement. He sees men limp, vomit, stagger, collapse, recover, fail to recover, or disappear into duties away from the file. He learns that strength is measured not against comfort, but against the rate at which others fail. His own body becomes something he watches with suspicion. A swelling foot, a tightening chest, an infected blister, a persistent cough, a stomach turned by bad water. Any of these may threaten the identity he's trying to establish. A recruit fears looking weak before veterans. A veteran fears the moment experience cannot compel the flesh to continue. Rome can train endurance, it cannot guarantee it. And still the march carries its strange moments of beauty and distance. A man born near one Italian valley may see the sea for the first time beneath military orders, cross a mountain pass into a foreign world, sleep beside rivers whose names once meant nothing to him, pass ruined towns, temples, vineyards, forests, snowfields, desert edges, ports filled with languages he cannot follow. Empire is experienced first not by governors drawing borders, but by feet crossing places the soldier may never otherwise have known. He may hate the road, and yet find his idea of the world permanently enlarged by it. The same journey that grinds him down also makes him part of something vast and dangerous, something his civilian self could scarcely have pictured. Over time, the body no longer responds as it did on the first day. The load still weighs, the feet still ache, hunger still tightens the temper, and cold still steals sleep. But the man has adjusted his gait. He has learned to lift the pack without fighting it, to preserve energy, to read the rhythm of a march, to make small repairs before they become disasters, to eat what is available, to sleep when allowed, and to rise even when every joint protests. This is not the transformation of a human being into an unfeeling creature. It is almost the opposite. He feels each hardship, but has learned that feeling does not decide action. The body complains. The column moves. When the Roman army finally appears in front of an enemy, it brings this accumulated endurance with it. The opposing force may see shields, standards, helmets, and ranks, but not the hundreds of miles already forced into those legs, the heavy loads already carried over broken country, the nights slept in wet cloaks, the hunger swallowed, the blisters ignored, the dead left beside roads, or the discipline that has made suffering so familiar it no longer needs explanation. The terror is not that Roman soldiers are tireless, they are tired almost all the time. The terror is that they have been trained to arrive tired and remain dangerous. The march hardens the legs and back, but Rome does not leave the hands to chance. A soldier may endure heat, hunger, mud, and the endless grinding weight of his equipment. Yet all of that suffering means little if, when the line closes and an enemy is suddenly near enough to strike, he cannot move his shield and weapon with trained precision. The road delivers a man to battle. Drill determines whether he remains useful once he gets there, somewhere within a Roman training ground. Before the shouting, before the broken shields, before the metallic confusion of real combat, a recruit stands facing an enemy that neither bleeds nor fears him, a wooden post driven firmly into the earth. It does not retreat. It does not flatter him with the thrill of victory. It simply waits while he learns how quickly his arms tire, how clumsy an untrained blow can be, and how little resemblance there is between imagining violence and performing it under discipline. Later, Roman military writing describes recruits practicing against wooden posts with weapons and shields, made heavier than the real equipment they would use in battle. The logic is severe and immediately understandable. If a man learns to control an oversized burden in training, his proper weapon will seem lighter and faster when death is close. Ancient authors present such exercises as part of an admired tradition of rigorous instruction. Although historians cannot assume that every Roman soldier in every period trained in precisely the same fashion with equal regularity, regulations and ideals are not the same thing as daily reality across centuries of war. Some units are commanded well, others poorly. Some recruits receive time to train, others may be hurried into danger because a crisis demands bodies immediately. Nevertheless, the prominence of these methods in Roman military thinking reveals an essential principle. Courage must be prepared in advance by muscular habit. The weapon commonly associated with the Roman legionary is short compared with the grand blades of later imagination. The sword, in various changing forms across Rome's history, is designed for use in close conditions, where an infantryman is shielded, crowded, pressed by companions, and confronted by enemies at terrifying proximity. Popular images often show men hacking wildly in open space, each fighter carving broad arcs through the air, in a disciplined close formation. Such movement can be wasteful, dangerous, or impossible. An uncontrolled slash opens the body, tires the arm, risks striking a comrade, and may catch uselessly against shield, helmet, or bone. A compact thrust delivered from behind protection is less dramatic, but it can be faster, harder to stop, and horrifyingly effective against exposed abdomen, thigh, groin, flank, or throat. Roman writers praise the thrust as deadly and efficient. Whether all battlefield fighting followed cleanly the method preferred in instruction is another matter. No man in a collapsing melee behaves like a training diagram, but drill gives him a default action when thought becomes slow and fear becomes fast. At the post, the recruit learns not simply to stab, but to control his whole body. His shield must stay between him and imagined danger. His weapon must return quickly after each movement. His feet must place him close enough to reach without making him easy to strike. His shoulders must remain useful after repeated effort. He learns to direct blows at vulnerable points rather than beat vainly against protection. If he overextends, an instructor sees it. If he lowers his shield, an instructor sees it. If fatigue turns his practice into sloppy performance, that too becomes visible. The post is silent, but the men watching are not. A mistake made against wood earns correction or humiliation. A mistake made against an armed enemy may spill a man's entrails into the dirt before he fully understands what he has done wrong. The shield itself must be trained as relentlessly as the sword. To an observer who has never used one, a large shield can seem like passive equipment, a wall the soldier merely holds. In reality, it demands strength, timing, balance, and constant attention. It obstructs the user's sight as it protects him. It tires shoulder and forearm. It must respond to blows, missiles, jostling companions, broken ground, shifting formation, and the shock of another human being trying to force his way through it. Its edge can press, strike, create room, deflect a weapon, or help unbalance an opponent. A recruit who regards his shield only as a surface behind which to hide soon becomes exhausted or exposed. A trained soldier uses it as the centre of his fighting posture, keeping violence on the far side of wood, hide, and metal for as long as fortune allows. This is why the army's physical conditioning is inseparable from weapons work. A man may strike powerfully several times when rested. Rome needs him able to hold his shield and deliver controlled violence after marching under weight, after waiting in fear, after running into position, after receiving impacts, after his mouth has dried and his muscles have begun to burn. Training therefore turns individual actions into repetitions, then repetitions into habits durable under fatigue. Recruits practice advancing, withdrawing, holding positions, shifting around obstacles, handling weapons, responding to signals, perhaps throwing missiles and using different forms of equipment according to their era and unit. They must perform actions when calm so often that, in battle, terror does not erase every useful movement. This cannot remove fear. No serious understanding of combat suggests that drill makes men indifferent to death. What it can do is give frightened men something to do together before panic decides for them. The throwing spear or heavy javelin associated with many Roman legionaries adds another stage to the violence. Before swords close the distance, missiles can disrupt the enemy's confidence and formation. A properly delivered heavy missile striking a shield may penetrate, weigh it down, interfere with its use, or force a man to discard it, though the exact effects of Roman javelins and the intent behind particular designs have been much debated. The popular story that every Roman javelin was specially built to bend on impact so it could not be thrown back is too neat when applied universally across all periods and examples. Surviving weapons vary, and tactical equipment changes. What remains clear is that the legionary is trained to do more than stand and receive an attack. He can advance under order, cast a disruptive volley, and close rapidly while the opposing line is absorbing the shock. The timing matters. A thrown weapon wasted too early is an opportunity lost. A cast delivered at effective range just before collision can make the next seconds terrible for the men facing it. Imagine the recruit learning that sequence on a training ground. There is no enemy rush, only instruction, repeated movement, perhaps the ridicule of men who already perform it smoothly. He lifts, aims, throws, he fumbles, he misjudges distance. His shield drifts down because the act of casting draws his attention away from protection. His breath becomes ragged faster than pride expects. He must retrieve, reset, repeat. The army has little interest in the fact that he understands the exercise intellectually. It needs the motion absorbed into him. Prepare, move, cast, protect, close, strike, remain aligned, await the next command. Battle allows no pause for a man to remember what he was told weeks earlier. His body must retrieve the lesson before fear buries it. Formation drill is harder still because an individual can perform beautifully alone and become a menace when placed among hundreds of men. The legionary's world is crowded. He fights in relation to shoulders, shields, ranks, standards, officers, and signals. His instinct under threat may be to recoil, push forward wildly, turn toward a scream, pursue a vulnerable opponent, or seek open air away from the crushing press. Formation demands that he resist impulses that feel natural. He must maintain enough order that others can protect him, and he can protect them. He must know that the man on his flank is frightened too, and that their survival may depend upon neither deciding suddenly to become an individual. In battle, gaps invite penetration. Disorder spreads faster than commands. Once men begin turning, the shield that protected the front becomes a burden during flight, and slaughter often begins not in the contest between two steady lines. But when one line loses the belief that it can remain where it stands, Roman training is designed to delay that moment. It binds men into motion shared with others. Marching in order is not merely parade display. It teaches spacing, response, pace, and subordination of private rhythm to collective movement. Setting up camp is not merely labour. It rehearses unit placement and the expectation that every group has a task. Weapons drill is not merely strength work. It creates predictable behaviour. Obedience to signals is not bureaucratic obsession. It is a thread that may still hold when noise makes speech useless. Standards are not ornaments. They give the eye a point of loyalty and orientation when dust, terror, and confusion remove the broader field from view. A trained soldier still feels the urge to save himself. The army tries to ensure that, for as long as possible, saving himself seems inseparable from staying with the group. Training can also be humiliating because it reduces the glorious idea of the warrior to basic corrections. A young man may have admired tales of ancestors or local heroes, believing battle will reveal something noble about him. Instead, he spends days being told that his stance is wrong, his grip weak, his turn too slow, his breathing poor, his equipment badly maintained, his throw inaccurate, his endurance inadequate. He attacks wood while older men watch. He carries burdens while muscles shake. The act of training insists that natural bravery is not enough, perhaps not even the most important quality. The recruit must accept being unmade in public before he can be rebuilt as dependable. This is one reason military institutions develop such strong cultures of mockery, pride, rivalry, and earned respect. The soldier who has endured correction and become competent takes fierce satisfaction in watching the next man discover how little he knows. There are rewards as well as shame. A body that first felt unwieldy becomes more controlled. The recruit begins to notice that his shield no longer lags after a movement, that his thrust returns more quickly, that his throw carries with greater accuracy, that he can continue an exercise after others tire. Veterans stop treating him solely as a nuisance. A small recognition from an officer or an approving gesture from men in his unit may matter intensely, because it signals that he is no longer merely present. He is becoming reliable. He may begin to trust his own hands in a new way. This confidence is dangerous if it grows into carelessness, but indispensable when battle approaches. A terrified man who believes he has no useful skill may run before testing himself. A frightened man who has repeated a task until it feels familiar has at least one narrow bridge across the chaos. The conditions of actual battle will assault that familiarity. Training grounds are not littered with the wounded. Wooden posts do not scream or seize a weapon. Practice shields do not reveal a friend's face suddenly emptied by a spear. In battle, missiles arrive unpredictably, noise tears commands apart, blood makes surfaces slippery, bodies obstruct footing, wounded men stumble backward into ranks, and an enemy may look far more determined than any recruit hoped. Ancient accounts of combat are shaped by literary convention and the interests of elite authors. They rarely capture the minute-by-minute inner experience of an ordinary infantryman. Yet no source is needed to understand that a man's first close encounter with real violence can break assumptions formed in training. What drill provides is not a guarantee of courage, but a set of motions to cling to while the mind catches up with horror. Rome also trains through spectacle and memory. Soldiers hear of units that held and units that broke, men honoured for bravery and men punished for failure, military decorations, crowns, awards, commendations, captured standards, old scars, and public ceremonies teach the recruit what kinds of behaviour the institution recognises. An army is trained not only by instructors, but by stories circulating through its ranks. Some are truthful, some exaggerated. Some polished until they become moral weapons. The message remains steady: stand firm, obey, protect the standard, do not shame the unit, and the army may remember you. Fail in the wrong way, and survival itself may become dishonourable. Such beliefs press upon the soldier when muscle begins to fail. Fear of death competes with fear of disgrace, and Roman discipline becomes strongest when neither allows easy escape. Yet the idea that Roman soldiers were uniformly superior swordsmen must be resisted. Rome fights many opponents skilled in their own weapons and traditions. Samnite fighters in rough terrain, Celtic warriors capable of terrifying assaults, Iberian troops admired and recruited for their fighting qualities, Hellenistic infantry drilled in dense formations, cavalry archers and horsemen of the Eastern world, Germanic warbands dangerous in forest and ambush, and countless others who kill Roman soldiers in very large numbers. Roman equipment is not magic. Roman drill does not always prevail. A poorly commanded legion may be destroyed. A trained man caught in an ambush can die before reaching proper order. A weary line struck at the wrong moment may dissolve. What survives in the record suggests that Rome's advantage lies less in possessing a single, unbeatable fighting technique than in combining training with organisation, reinforcement, engineering, recruitment, discipline, and the grim ability to rebuild after loss. For the individual soldier, however, all those larger systems eventually narrow to the space behind his shield, after weeks or months of striking wood, casting practice weapons, moving under command, and absorbing correction. The day arrives when the object in front of him is no longer a post. The enemy has eyes, the enemy carries a weapon. The enemy is also trying to survive, also capable of courage, also driven by loyalty, fear, anger, reward, or desperation. The Roman soldier's arm knows a movement practiced 1,000 times, but his mind understands that this thrust will enter living flesh if it succeeds. He must cross the distance between training and killing in a moment. That is the darkest meaning of the exercises. The army does not simply make bodies tougher. It makes lethal actions familiar enough to be performed when the full meaning of them would otherwise freeze the hand. The weighted wooden sword, the heavy shield, the scarred practice post, the repeated throw, the shouted correction, the rigid line of men moving together, all of it is preparation for an instant when obedience and survival demand that the soldier act faster than pity, shock, or imagination. Roman power grows not only because its soldiers can march through suffering, but because, once they arrive, they have been taught to convert exhaustion into controlled violence. And when the practice ends for the day, no reward of rest is guaranteed. The weapons are set aside or maintained, the body already bruised by training receives its next demand, and the soldier returns to the other great labour that makes the legion dangerous. He has learned how to strike behind a shield. Now, still aching from that lesson, he may be handed a tool and sent to move earth. The tool is placed into the soldier's hand almost as naturally as the weapon. A man who has spent the day marching under a burden, or striking a practice post until his shoulders burn, may still discover that Rome has one more demand waiting for him before he can eat or sleep. The sword teaches him how to kill at close range. The shovel, pick, axe, basket, stake, and saw teach him how Roman armies survive long enough to reach that range on favourable terms. In the fading light beyond a hostile ridge, a legionary may feel less like the master of an empire than an exhausted labourer trapped inside an endless construction project. Yet the trench he cuts is not separate from warfare. It is warfare in its most deliberate form. Every bite of iron into soil says that an army which arrived vulnerable intends to be harder to destroy by nightfall. The camp begins with measurement and habit. An officer or experienced party identifies ground with access to water if possible, enough space for the force, defensible approaches, and terrain that does not invite disaster from flooding, surprise, or attack from above. Perfection is rarely available. A commander may have to accept what the day, the enemy, and the landscape allow. Once chosen, the area must be marked and ordered. The Roman army cannot simply pour itself onto the earth in whatever arrangement tired men prefer. Entrances, defensive lines, internal routes, command spaces, units, animals, supplies, and tents must be positioned so that thousands of men can find their places, receive orders, feed themselves, guard the perimeter, and form for departure or battle without becoming a tangled mass. For a soldier whose every muscle is begging him to drop where he stands, the precision must feel almost insulting. The camp is not built according to the wishes of tired bodies. Tired bodies are made to obey the plan. Then the ground opens. Soldiers dig a ditch around the enclosure, using tools carried with the army and whatever labour can be organised before darkness deepens. Excavated soil is cast inward, forming a raised bank. Stakes, timber, brush, stones, or available materials strengthen the obstacle. The resulting defence may be modest when the halt is brief and danger distant, or far more serious when an army expects attack. Not every Roman marching camp is the same size, depth, or shape. Archaeology reveals variation, haste, adaptation, and sometimes only the faint surviving outline of what once protected men for a night. A shallow ditch after centuries of erosion can scarcely convey the effort that created it. Yet even a temporary perimeter changes the meaning of a sleeping army. An attacker no longer faces scattered men surprised among their baggage. He must cross an obstacle while defenders rise behind a boundary they already understand. To dig while fresh is labour, to dig after a march is a test of submission to routine. The soldier's hands close around handles already slick with sweat and grime. Shoulders strained by shield and pack must now lift earth. The back bends again and again. Feet already blistered brace against loose soil. Men who have inhaled road dust all day breathe dirt from the trench edge as well. Hunger tightens, light fades. Somewhere nearby, perhaps, fires have begun for those assigned to other duties. And the smell of food carries farther than a weary man would like. Yet the ditch continues, because its incompleteness would be visible not only to Roman officers, but to any enemy bold enough to approach. The soldier learns that exhaustion is not merely something endured. It is a condition in which the correct task must still be completed. This habit astonishes opponents because many armies camp, but few develop the Roman attachment to organised fortification with such relentless consistency. An enemy following a Roman column may watch men struggle beneath loads and believe them ready to be broken. But attacking during the march requires timing and opportunity. Waiting until evening may mean confronting a defensive work that did not exist a few hours earlier. Rome brings walls in pieces and tools, stakes, trained labour. Command structure and expectation. The soldiers do not require stone towers or years of building to transform their position. They need ground and time enough to cut into it. A day's movement ends not with the Romans scattered across alien land, but with alien land altered to resemble the defensive logic of Rome. Inside the camp, order is as important as the perimeter. Roads or lanes allow men and messengers to move. Equipment and baggage are placed where they can be protected and retrieved. Animals need control, for frightened beasts in darkness can do enormous damage to an army's organisation. Units occupy predictable spaces. Watch arrangements place some men at rest, while others remain responsible for every uncertain sound beyond the ditch. The commander's location is not merely ceremonial. It's part of the camp's nervous system, allowing orders to travel through a settlement created in hours and destroyed again at dawn. A temporary camp is a city without civilians, built for an evening by men whose citizenship has been narrowed to obedience and survival. Its cleanliness, by ancient standards, also matters. A crowd of thousands produces filth quickly, human waste, animal dung, blood, food scraps, refuse, stagnant water, spoiled material, and the contamination that follows when order fails. Roman armies cannot understand disease in a modern biological sense, and camp life remains dangerous to health. But practical experience teaches that sanitation, drainage, water management, spacing, and regulated disposal are not luxuries. They are ways to preserve fighting strength. A badly placed camp can weaken an army without a single hostile weapon entering it. A well-managed one can reduce some of the risks created whenever large numbers of men and animals live tightly packed together, and the shovel thus protects the soldier in more than one way. It cuts a defensive ditch before him, and it helps keep the sickness of the camp from rising behind him. Sometimes the labour does not end with the enclosure. A Roman army moves through country that cannot always support its progress without alteration. Roads must be cleared, graded, strengthened, or created. Marshy stretches may need causeways or layers of material laid beneath feet and wheels. Rivers require bridges, boats, rafts, repaired crossings, or fortified points of passage. Hills may demand ramps. Forest edges must be cut back so an ambush is harder to conceal. Siege lines require enormous amounts of earth, timber, stone, muscle, rope, tools, patience, and suffering. When later generations look at Rome's roads, fortresses, bridges, walls, and frontier works, They often see engineering as a separate Roman genius, an achievement of surveyors and architects. But behind every measured line are men carrying, digging, dragging, cutting, placing, lifting, and repeating. Roman engineering is written in the exhausted bodies of soldiers as much as in surviving stone. This is especially striking because the legionaries' labour can be offensive as well as defensive. A road driven through difficult country does not merely make travel easier, it allows supply, reinforcement, patrol, punishment, and permanent control. A bridge thrown across a river does not merely solve an obstacle, it tells the people watching from the far bank that what they believed protected them may no longer do so. A fortified post built near a rebellious region changes the future of that region, even when no battle is underway. A siege ramp advancing toward a wall is a form of slow-moving violence. Earth and timber pushed forward until a city's height is no longer safety. Rome's soldier becomes dangerous not only because he can stab an enemy, but because he can reshape the conditions under which an enemy must resist. Few commanders exploit this more dramatically than Julius Caesar, though his campaigns belong to a later stage of the Republic, when Rome's military habits have already deepened through generations of war. In his accounts of campaigns in Gaul, armies appear building bridges, camps, siege works, lines of fortification, and defences at extraordinary speed. Caesar writes partly to shape his own reputation, and the exact texture of his narratives must be read with caution. He has every reason to emphasise Roman competence and his own command. Yet archaeology and the wider Roman military record confirm that large-scale field engineering is not mere literary fantasy. At Alesia, Roman forces besieging the Gallic leader Vercingetorix's construct defensive lines aimed inward against the trapped defenders, and outward against a relieving army approaching from beyond. The image is almost impossible to improve as a symbol of Roman warfare. Soldiers enclosed between two possible enemies, answering danger not by withdrawing, but by digging until they have turned the landscape into a weapon. The man doing that work does not see the grand symbol from above. He sees the next stretch of ditch. He sees timber to be cut, sharpened obstacles to be set, earth to be carried, defensive features to be maintained, and companions collapsing into brief sleep before another alarm. He may know that an army is gathering outside the lines and desperate enemies remain within them. He may understand that failure will mean not a clean defeat, but a chaotic massacre between two forces. Fear is present in every load of soil, yet building gives fear an activity. A wall finished, an obstacle planted, a trench deepened, a watch position strengthened. Each task creates a small measurable answer to a threat too large to hold comfortably in the mind. There is a lesser-known intimacy in the remains of such works. Archaeologists do not recover only impressive fort lines. They find pits, ovens, nails, broken tools, discarded fragments, animal bones, temporary structures, lost items, evidence of drainage and waste, the material residue of bodies needing to eat, repair, defecate, sleep, and continue. A camp or siege line may be remembered as part of a commander's brilliant strategy. But the soil remembers the ordinary necessities that made strategy possible. Men lived inside these defences while waiting to kill or be killed. Their world was not a heroic panorama, but a crowded, smoky, dirty, anxious place where a broken shoe fitting, a missing tool, or an inadequate meal mattered with immediate force. The labour also creates a peculiar form of confidence. Soldiers who have built the camp know its boundaries in their muscles. They understand where the entrances lie, where their units gather, where the defences are strongest, where alarm will send them. If attacked at night, they are frightened men waking into confusion, but not entirely disoriented men. The earth they moved hours earlier guides them. Their exhaustion has purchased a structure within which they may survive. This may be why habitual fortification becomes more than a technical procedure. It forms part of the legion's emotional architecture. The camp is proof that the day has been brought under control, at least for a few hours. Outside remains uncertainty. Inside is a pattern made by Roman hands. Still, the cost accumulates. An army cannot demand endless labour without damaging the men who perform it. Long campaigns weaken equipment and bodies together. Hands split. Old injuries worsen. Muscles that seem hard enough one week become depleted the next. Food shortages make every basket of earth heavier. Rain fills trenches even as soldiers cut them. Frozen ground resists tools. Heat turns digging into a contest against collapse. Men may complain, curse, evade work where possible, or come to despise commanders whose ambition consumes them. The Roman ideal celebrates tireless labour, but actual soldiers are never tireless. The evidence remains incomplete about the daily suffering of most anonymous men, because they rarely leave personal accounts behind. What survives in the record suggests both extraordinary capacity and the constant danger that the burden could become too much. That danger is exactly why Rome requires labour to become routine before crisis arrives. A soldier first forced to dig under the immediate threat of attack may work badly, panic, or waste strength. A soldier who has dug every evening already knows the motion, the organisation, the tools, the expected result. He may hate the task more than ever, but hatred does not prevent skill. Repetition makes an extraordinary emergency resemble an ordinary demand. That is how the army turns men into engineers without allowing them to stop being fighters, and turns fighters into builders without suggesting that construction is beneath them. The distinction between battle and labour collapses. Both preserve the unit, both extend Roman power, both may determine who is alive when morning comes. By dawn, the work of the night can be abandoned almost casually. Tents fall, supplies are lifted, animals gathered, watchmen called in, and the column reforms. The ditch that caused so much pain may be left behind after a single sleep, an empty shape in the soil marking where thousands of men briefly forced order upon the land. To the soldier, there is something bitter in that abandonment. He has poured his remaining strength into defences he cannot carry with him. Yet he does carry the ability to make them again. That is the point. Rome's true wall is not the bank of earth around one camp. It is the expectation planted inside every man that, wherever the army halts, he will build security out of fatigue. The same hands that carry shield and sword lift the pack once more. The line begins moving. Behind it lies another scar in the ground. Ahead waits another evening, another possible ditch, another road to be forced through mud or forest or stone. The legionary is not given the luxury of choosing whether he is a warrior or a labourer. Rome has made him both, because a sword wins only the ground within reach of an arm, while a tool can prepare the ground on which entire armies survive, advance, and conquer. The ditch behind the departing column is empty by morning, but the discipline that forced men to dig it travels with them. It moves invisibly beneath the standards, alongside the officers, inside the silence of soldiers who know that failing an order may bring consequences more immediate than the enemy. Rome can ask men to carry crushing loads, strike posts until their arms weaken, build defences after sunset, stand watch while others sleep, and return to the road before their bodies have recovered, because the army creates a world in which obedience is not optional. There are rewards for endurance, decorations for courage, plunder for victory, pay when the system functions, promotion for men who distinguish themselves, and the fierce belonging of comrades who have suffered together. But behind all of these stands another instrument, colder than honour and often more reliable in the worst hour punishment. The Roman soldier fears the enemy in front of him. He may also fear the judgment waiting behind him if he fails in a way the army refuses to forgive. Discipline begins with the ordinary offences that can ruin military life long before a battle starts. A man leaves his assigned duty, a sentry falls asleep, equipment is neglected, food is stolen, a soldier wanders beyond permission, strikes a superior, disobeys an order, creates disorder during a march, or abandons his place at a moment when other men depend upon him. In civilian life, many failures injure primarily the person who commits them, or the household around him. In an army, a small private failure can open a gate at night, expose a camp to surprise, break the timing of an attack, leave a formation weaker, or persuade frightened men that rules are beginning to dissolve. Roman officers do not need to believe every mistake is wicked in order to treat it as dangerous. They know that discipline decays visibly. One unpunished absence becomes another. One sleeping guard teaches others that sleep may be worth the risk. One man fleeing without consequence makes the next man's courage more difficult. For minor breaches, penalties might include extra duties, reduced rations, fines, loss of rank or privileges, humiliating assignments, harsh physical treatment, or public reprimand. The exact range of punishments changes across Rome's many centuries, between units, commanders, and situations. No ancient army operates with perfect consistency, and commanders themselves may be cruel, corrupt, pragmatic, lenient, desperate, or politically calculating. Yet the central idea remains remarkably durable. Punishment is not merely meant to correct the offender, it is a performance before witnesses. A soldier learns what the army considers intolerable by seeing what happens to the man who crosses the line. Humiliation has special force inside a community built upon masculine pride and shared danger. A man can survive a beating and still dread being marked as unreliable among those who must sleep, march, fight, and eat beside him. Roman military culture places enormous weight on standing, reputation, courage, and belonging. A soldier who is mocked, demoted, assigned degrading labour, separated from honourable companions, or publicly treated as cowardly suffers a wound that reaches beyond the skin. His comrades understand the message because they live inside the same narrow world. An army on campaign is not a city where a disgraced man can disappear down another street and rebuild his name among strangers. It is a moving enclosure of memory. Men remember who held, they remember who ran, they remember who allowed them to carry his portion of danger. This pressure can bind a unit tightly together, but it can also make life within the ranks merciless. The same comradeship that sustains men through hunger and fear may become an instrument of enforcement. Soldiers depend on one another, and that dependence creates little patience for the man whose negligence threatens all of them. A sleeping sentry does not merely anger an officer, he may infuriate the men whose throats could have been opened because he chose rest over duty. A man who throws away his shield in flight does not simply admit his terror, he leaves others exposed to the consequences of panic. Rome makes military failure a social offence, not just a breach of regulations. The soldier is trained to feel that he has two lines. He must not break the line facing the enemy, and the line of judgment formed by the men beside him. Ancient descriptions of Roman military justice are most chilling when they describe punishment for cowardice, desertion, or failure on guard. The Greek historian Polybius, writing in the 2nd century before the Common Era, and impressed by the organisation that helped Rome dominate the Mediterranean, gives an account of a brutal punishment sometimes translated as cudgelling, a condemned soldier, after formal judgment, is struck by a tribune and then attacked by fellow soldiers with clubs and stones, usually dying under their blows or fleeing into disgrace if he somehow escapes. The detail is horrifying because it makes comrades executioners. The men who share the trench, the march, and the cooking fire are required to destroy one of their own in the name of collective survival. Whether every case unfolded exactly as this idealised description presents, it cannot be known. and Roman practice changed across time, but the principle is unmistakable. The army insists that certain failures are crimes against everyone in the unit, and therefore everyone must participate in their rejection. For a soldier watching such a punishment, the lesson enters deeply. An enemy may kill him quickly, or may not reach him at all. The army knows his name, his unit, his duty, and the circumstances of his failure. An enemy cannot always be anticipated. Punishment is organised, public, and deliberate. This does not mean Roman soldiers fight only because they fear their officers. Armies sustained solely by internal terror become brittle, and Roman history is filled with soldiers who display real attachment to comrades, commanders, standards, rewards, and identity. But in the most unstable instant, when a tired man sees the line wavering and senses the possibility of escape, memory matters. He remembers that running may not mean safety, it may mean shame, exclusion, or death delivered by his own side. Nothing embodies the grim reputation of Roman discipline more than decimation. The word has survived long after the world that gave it meaning, often used casually for any great destruction. But its original sense is precise and terrible, the selection of 1 man in 10 from a disgraced group for execution, with the survivors receiving lesser punishments, reduced rations, or forced exposure outside the protected camp. Ancient sources connect decimation with units guilty of mutiny, desertion, or collective cowardice. The method is designed to solve a problem normal punishment cannot easily address. When an entire body of soldiers has failed, it may be impossible or impractical to execute everyone. The army still needs men. Random selection spreads terror across the guilty group while preserving most of its manpower. The survivors live because chance spared them, not because they have been forgiven. Yet decimation must not be imagined as a routine event hovering over every Roman legion after every unsuccessful fight. It is famous precisely because it is extreme. Roman authors describe it with fascination and horror, often using it to emphasize the frightening severity of an old commander, or to contrast ancestral hardness with later decline. Some recorded instances may reflect real episodes. Some details may be shaped by the moral purposes of writers who admired terrifying discipline at a safe distance. Scholars still debate particular accounts, their accuracy, and how frequently the practice actually occurred. What is certain is that Roman military culture could imagine collective punishment on this scale as legitimate, and commanders in some periods were willing to make that imagination real. Decimation is not the everyday explanation for Roman effectiveness. It is the shadow at the far edge of the system, the ultimate warning that the life of an individual soldier can be taken not only because he personally failed, but because the group to which he belongs has ceased to satisfy Rome's demands. The randomness is what makes it almost unbearable. In an ordinary execution, a man may tell himself that another soldier will be punished because that soldier committed a specific act. In decimation, a man who ran no faster than the rest, or who perhaps did everything he could within a collapsing unit, can be chosen because the group has been condemned. The army declares that collective failure has contaminated everyone. Comrades draw lots or are otherwise selected. Men who may have shared years of danger are forced into the ritual destruction of the unlucky few. The survivors return to service knowing that the institution they serve has spared them only because it intends to use them again. They have been reminded, as with blood, that the army values obedience above individual explanations. This severity does not always produce loyalty. It can produce hatred. Roman armies mutiny more than once across their long history. Soldiers resist conditions, demand pay, reject commanders, complain of endless campaigns, and sometimes become decisive political actors capable of raising and destroying emperors. Men who are treated as tools do not necessarily remain silent tools forever. A commander who applies punishment without judgment may terrify his soldiers, but lose their willingness to follow him when his authority weakens. The line between discipline and abuse is not simply moral, it is practical. Too little control, and the army falls apart in danger. Too much arbitrary cruelty, and the army may discover that it possesses weapons while the commander possesses only a title. Rome repeatedly walks this dangerous line, sometimes with extraordinary effectiveness, sometimes with bloodshed among its own ranks. Good commanders understand that severity works best when joined to participation, fairness, and reward. A general who marches with his men, shares their risks, secures supplies, recognizes courage, distributes rewards, and punishes according to rules can demand more than one who remains comfortable while soldiers starve. Roman military literature repeatedly admires commanders who combine strictness with an appearance of justice. This admiration may polish reality. Famous generals often control the telling of their own actions. Still, soldiers are not blind. They know whether hardship serves a plausible purpose or only an officer's vanity. They know whether punishment protects the unit or feeds cruelty. The commander who convinces men that his severity is the price of shared survival may turn discipline into loyalty. The commander who fails may find that terror has a breaking point. The centurion stands at the heart of this daily pressure. Later, Roman memory and surviving evidence present centurions as figures of experience, command, visibility, courage, and often physical severity. He's close enough to the ranks to know which soldier lags, which complains, which keeps his kit in order, which drinks too much, which can be trusted on watch, and which may need punishment before carelessness spreads. The centurion's vine staff becomes a symbol of authority and, in some accounts, of brutality. He's not an abstract regulation. He's the man who can praise, strike, assign, shame, lead from the front, and die in a position conspicuous enough to show others whether the order to stand is serious. A recruit may never meet the political leaders whose wars he fights, but he knows the officers whose eyes follow him through camp. Under such pressure, obedience can sink into the body as deeply as marching strength or weapons skill. A soldier forms ranks because delay is dangerous. He guards his post because sleep may kill him twice, once by enemy hands and once by Roman judgment. He retrieves equipment because losing it is shameful. He stays near the standard because separation threatens both survival and identity. He does not need to weigh every order as a free citizen deciding whether it suits him. The entire system has trained that freedom out of the immediate moment. This is the quality that makes the Legion look inhuman from the outside. Opponents see men continuing to build, advance, hold, and return after punishment that would seem enough to destroy morale, yet inside the ranks the explanation is painfully human pride, fear, habit, companionship, ambition, shame, hope of reward, dread of isolation, and the knowledge that the army has narrowed every choice until endurance feels safer than refusal. When a camp settles at night, punishment is part of its architecture as surely as ditch and rampart. The perimeter protects soldiers from the darkness outside, while discipline guards against disorder within. A man standing sentry feels both threats. Beyond the ditch may be movement, a snapped branch, the approach of an enemy testing the Roman line. Behind him lie sleeping comrades, and the authority that placed him there. He may be cold, ill, angry, almost unable to keep his eyes open. No heroic audience watches his lonely hour, yet the survival of thousands can depend on an anonymous man defeating his own exhaustion until relief arrives. That is how Rome sharpens the soldier beyond iron. The weapon at his side can harm an enemy. Discipline turns the weapon inward as well, pressing against every impulse to drop the burden, abandon the post, flee the line, or refuse the order. The system is neither noble nor simple. It can create courage, and it can enforce terror. It can bind men together, and it can compel them to kill one of their own. It can preserve an army in disaster, and it can sow bitterness that later erupts. But when those trained, burdened, watched, rewarded, and frightened soldiers step onto a battlefield, they carry more than shields and swords. They carry the invisible weight of what happens if they fail. Rome has made retreat from duty almost as dangerous as the enemy ahead. And soon, an enemy unlike any Rome has faced before will test whether even this discipline is enough. He will not merely attack Roman soldiers, he will study their confidence, draw them where their order becomes a trap, and leave thousands of the most disciplined men in Italy lying dead in fields where obedience cannot save them. The enemy who comes for Rome does not arrive as a barbarian storm breaking blindly against disciplined ranks. He arrives as a commander who understands exactly what disciplined ranks can be persuaded to do. In 218, before the Common Era, Hannibal Barca brings war into Italy by a route so punishing that it already seems to violate ordinary military logic. His Carthaginian-led army crosses from Iberia, moves through Gaul, forces a passage over the Alps, and descends into northern Italy depleted. Battered, but still dangerous. His force is not one people under one old civic tradition. It includes Africans, Iberians, Gauls, cavalry from different regions, specialists shaped by different weapons and fighting methods, and the surviving elephants that become one of the enduring images of his campaign. Rome has fought hard enemies before. It has survived humiliations, raised new levies, adapted to difficult terrain, and made persistence into a weapon. But Hannibal is something different. He does not merely challenge Rome's endurance. He begins by turning Rome's habits against it. The Romans know discipline. They know roads, camps, formations, duty, punishment, and the confidence that comes from having defeated one Italian rival after another. By this point, Rome possesses extraordinary reserves of manpower through its citizens and allied communities. It has reason to believe that even loss can be absorbed. That belief is not foolish. It will eventually prove essential to survival. But in the early encounters with Hannibal, Roman confidence repeatedly pushes armies toward battles on terms chosen by a commander who is better at reading men than they are at reading him. At the river Ticinus, Roman forces encounter the speed and aggression of Hannibal's cavalry. Soon afterward, at the Trebia, the trap becomes far more severe. It is winter. The Roman soldiers are drawn across an icy river, cold, hungry, and physically diminished before the main fighting properly begins. Hannibal has prepared the ground and concealed a force under his brother Mago to strike at the right moment. The Romans do not enter battle as the idealized legionaries of a training yard. Rested behind shields with every motion under control, they wade through freezing water and form under pressure, their bodies already robbed of warmth and energy. When the engagement closes around them, Roman discipline allows portions of the infantry to fight their way through, but it cannot turn a deliberately engineered disadvantage into victory. The lesson is brutal. A soldier may endure cold through strength of will. He cannot command his numbed muscles to perform as though the cold had never touched him. Hannibal's war is filled with such calculations. Terrain, temperature, food, timing, pride, impatience, intelligence, and deception become weapons in his hands. Roman training has taught men to remain useful in hardship. Hannibal teaches Rome that an enemy can create hardship on purpose, stacking one disadvantage upon another before the sword work begins. A disciplined army does not cease being vulnerable simply because its suffering is organized. If it can be induced to cross the wrong river at the wrong hour, pursue the wrong force down the wrong road, or form battle on ground chosen to magnify its weakness. The excellence of individual soldiers may only make the resulting destruction more prolonged. The following year, the disaster at Lake Trasimene darkens the lesson. Hannibal moves through difficult country and places his army in a position to ambush a Roman column along the northern shore of the lake. Morning mist hangs over the low ground. The Romans advance along a constricted route with water on one side and heights on the other. When the attack erupts, it does not present them with the ordered battle they have been trained to expect. Enemy forces descend from concealed positions. Noise, fog, terrain, and shock break the army's ability to form in the normal way. Units struggle separately. Soldiers may not understand the shape of the battle at all. Men who have been taught that survival depends on alignment and command suddenly find themselves in a landscape where alignment cannot easily be created and command cannot reach them. Ancient accounts dramatize the slaughter, and their precise numbers and details cannot always be accepted without caution. Victories and defeats in classical histories are often shaped to magnify the skill of one general, the folly of another, or the moral meaning of a calamity. Yet there is no doubt that Lake Trasimene is a terrible Roman defeat. One made more terrifying because it occurs not in a formal clash, but in an ambush so complete that a consular army is torn apart before its system can properly operate. The Roman soldier has been made into a part of a machine. Hannibal attacks the machine at the moment before its pieces can lock together. Rome now faces the kind of fear that punishment alone cannot solve. A man may be beaten for failing at his post. A unit may be disgraced for cowardice. But what punishment corrects an army destroyed by a commander who selects the moment of confusion with near-perfect cruelty? Roman severity has been designed to prevent men from failing Rome. Hannibal forces Romans to consider that their commanders and assumptions may fail the men. This is a dangerous recognition in any military culture built on obedience. The legionary is told to stand, march, endure, and trust the system. What happens when he has done all of those things and the system leads him into cold water, fog, enclosure, and death? For a time, Rome chooses restraint. Quintus Fabius Maximus, later remembered through the title associated with delay, refuses to give Hannibal the decisive battle he seeks. Instead of meeting him in an open contest of confidence and honour, Fabius shadows, harasses, denies, watches, and seeks to wear down an invading army far from its secure sources of reinforcement. To some Romans, this looks shameful. A society accustomed to measuring military virtue through direct confrontation does not easily admire a commander who allows an enemy to burn countryside while avoiding the great collision that might avenge previous humiliation. Roman fields suffer. Allied trust is strained. Hannibal remains visibly inside Italy. Yet Fabius sees what anger resists admitting a Roman army can be courageous, disciplined, and still be destroyed if it fights the wrong man on the terms he wants. Restraint proves politically fragile. Rome's losses demand revenge, and its enormous mobilization seems to offer the answer. In 216 before the Common Era, Rome gathers a massive army and confronts Hannibal near Cannae in southeastern Italy. The size of the Roman force expresses both strength and desperation. Rome has not been frightened into paralysis. It has drawn deeper upon manpower, assembled citizens and allies, and placed an extraordinary mass into the field with the intention of crushing the invader beneath concentrated force. Here is the confidence at the core of the Roman military system if a hard blow fails. Deliver a heavier one. If men are lost, raise more. If Hannibal has survived earlier battles, force the battle from which even his skill cannot rescue him. Cannae becomes the answer Rome never wanted to receive. The ground is open enough for a great confrontation. The Roman infantry advances in deep, heavy concentration, a powerful mass intended to drive through Hannibal's centre. The Carthaginian line gives ground in a controlled curve as the Roman pressure pushes forward. What feels like success draws the infantry deeper into compression. Men are packed more tightly. Space for weapons narrows. Commands become less useful. The Roman soldiers at the front press on. Those behind drive forward without fully seeing what is happening ahead. Meanwhile, Hannibal's stronger African infantry turns inward upon the Roman flanks, and his cavalry, having overcome Roman and allied horsemen, eventually strikes the rear. The force Rome intended as a crushing fist becomes an enclosed mass of men unable to deploy their strength, hemmed in by enemies and by their own density. This is not the failure of untrained cowards. That is what makes Cannae so disturbing. Roman soldiers do not simply scatter at the first shock and escape by abandoning duty. Many remain packed together in a killing ground, where the discipline that keeps them present also prevents easy survival. Their formation, their numbers, their pressure forward, and their refusal or inability to dissolve become part of the trap. A soldier near the centre may have no meaningful enemy to strike for much of the catastrophe. Only shields, backs, elbows, dust, heat, terror, and the knowledge that the outer layers of the army are being cut apart. Air itself becomes precious. The dead and wounded fall where living men have barely room to stand. Men trained to face danger at the front discover that death can close from every direction. The number of Romans killed at Cannae is given differently by ancient sources, and historians continue to debate precise totals, troop numbers, and aspects of the deployment, but no argument over figures changes the scale of the calamity. Tens of thousands of Roman and allied soldiers are killed or captured in a single day. Among the dead are men of rank, officers, former magistrates, and an immense portion of the fighting strength Rome has brought to the field. Families throughout Italy receive no body to bury in familiar ground. Only news or silence. Communities that supplied allied troops must wonder whether Rome can still protect them, or whether its demand for men has become a road leading directly into Hannibal's traps. The city has not merely lost a battle, it has seen the central promise of its military culture torn open. Obedience, numbers, courage, and repeated sacrifice do not always produce control. After such destruction, lesser states might seek terms. Hannibal's strategy depends in part upon this political fracture. He cannot necessarily storm Rome's walls and end the war by one spectacular seizure of the city. He needs Rome's allied system to come apart. If defeated communities see the Republic as exhausted, incompetent, or unable to defend them, they may abandon it. Some do. Capua and other communities shift allegiance. Southern Italy becomes a world of uncertainty, calculation, fear, and competing survival. Hannibal has proved that he can destroy Roman armies. Now he attempts to destroy the network that makes those armies replaceable. Rome answers in a manner that seems, even to enemies, almost unnatural. It does not surrender. It refuses to bargain from the position Hannibal has created. It raises more troops, including men who under ordinary circumstances would not have been the state's preferred soldiers. It reorders commands, guards loyalty where it can, punishes defection where it must, avoids repeating the grand collision that produced Cannae, and continues the war across years of loss. Desperation forces adaptations that pride resisted earlier. Fabius's caution no longer looks merely cowardly when the ground of Cannae is crowded with Roman dead. Discipline changes its meaning. It is no longer simply the courage to close with the enemy. It becomes the harder discipline of refusing the battle one's anger demands, of enduring devastation without offering Hannibal another perfect day. For the ordinary soldier, this new war must feel different from the confident advance of earlier generations. He marches through a landscape in which Roman armies have already vanished. Veterans who survived earlier defeats carry memories no training post could prepare them for icy water at the Trebia, fog at Trasimene, the compression and slaughter at Cannae. New recruits know that the enemy is not merely dangerous in a distant, abstract sense. He has broken armies like theirs repeatedly. On Italian soil, beneath Roman commanders, despite Roman discipline, the fear facing them is therefore not only fear of death, but fear that their own strengths are understood by the enemy and can be turned into pathways toward death. Yet even this fear becomes material for Rome's war machine. Survivors, replacements, allied contingents, younger men, older men, slaves promised freedom in special emergency formations, and citizens called into an effort larger than any one disaster to continue the struggle. There is no single magical reform born immediately from Cannae, no moment when Rome suddenly becomes an entirely different military civilization. The evidence remains incomplete, and the later tendency to turn the war into a moral tale of Roman toughness can conceal the panic, disagreement, grief, coercion, and political violence beneath survival. But what survives in the record suggests that Rome's greatest military transformation is not a new sword or new formation. It is the discovery that an army and a state can absorb defeats so terrible they seem final, then make continuation itself the strategy. Hannibal exposes every weakness inside Roman confidence. He shows that strict training cannot rescue an army trapped by superior planning, that aggressive courage can become obedience to disaster, that dense formations can suffocate under their own power, and that the men expected to endure everything can be killed in numbers large enough to shake an entire political order. Yet by forcing Rome into its darkest crisis, he also reveals the depth of the system he's trying to break. Rome's soldiers have been trained to remain in place when a human body longs to flee. Now Rome itself behaves like one of its soldiers, wounded, humiliated, surrounded by evidence of failure. It does not run. The army that emerges from this war will carry a harder memory than any drill can provide. It has learned that being Roman does not prevent slaughter. It has learned that a famous name, a large levy, and a direct advance may bring not victory but annihilation. It has learned to fear brilliant enemies, to value caution when caution preserves strength, and to understand war as something that may last long after the field where honour appears easiest to win. The monsters of Roman legend are not men who never suffer defeat. They are men raised after defeat, handed the equipment of the dead, placed beneath standards shadowed by catastrophe, and ordered to continue marching through a country where Hannibal is still waiting. After Hannibal, Rome never entirely returns to the older illusion that war can be contained within a season, a field, or a generation. The Republic survives the worst invasion it has ever faced, but survival changes its appetite and its burdens. Armies cross seas more often, remain overseas longer, guard conquered territories, suppress revolts, chase ambitious enemies through unfamiliar landscapes, and secure wealth that begins flowing toward Rome in quantities earlier citizens could scarcely have imagined. Victory does not bring the farmer-soldier quietly home to a stable world. It opens further roads, further provinces, further commands, further reasons for men to remain away from their fields. Rome has learned to raise armies after catastrophe. Now it must learn what happens when armies become a near-permanent fact of public life. The soldier marching in the 2nd century before the Common Era still belongs, in theory, to a republic of citizens under obligation. But the wars are changing the meaning of that obligation. Service in Spain can drag on in harsh terrain against enemies difficult to pin down and costly to defeat. Campaigns in Macedonia, Greece, North Africa, and Asia Minor pull men far beyond Italy. A citizen levied for distant war may return years later with little certainty that the life he left has waited for him intact. The small holding that once made military duty possible may suffer in his absence. Debts grow. Wealthier neighbours are better positioned to acquire distressed land. Slaves captured in Rome's wars increasingly labour on estates owned by men who profit from expansion more securely than the ordinary soldier who performed its violence. The picture must not be simplified into one clean collapse of independent farmers replaced overnight by giant plantations. Roman Italy is too varied, and scholars still debate the scale, timing, and causes of social change. But the pressure is real enough. The Republic demands ever more from citizens whose economic security does not necessarily grow with Rome's dominion. This contradiction enters politics with increasing force. Rome's conquests enrich the state and the elite, crowd triumphal processions with captives and treasure, and create an empire of obligations. Yet the question grows more difficult who is to fill the ranks if the class of citizens traditionally expected to serve is strained, diminished, indebted, absent, or reluctant to accept long service in ugly wars with uncertain reward. Earlier Romans could imagine the soldier defending his own land through military duty. Now many soldiers fight so far away that the immediate connection between farm and shield weakens. A man may endure years of campaigning not to preserve his own vineyard from a neighbouring raid, but to support Roman power in Spain, Africa, or the East, under commanders whose political careers rise with every victory. The army has not ceased to belong to the Republic. But the individual soldier is beginning to need more from military service than the satisfaction of having obeyed it. Into this tense world steps Gaius Marius. He is not born into the most glittering circle of Roman nobility. He rises from the Italian town of Arpinum, possesses military experience, formidable ambition, and the rough reputation of a man who can present himself against the inherited privilege of more aristocratic rivals. Later memory will make him one of the pivotal figures in Rome's military transformation. The commander who turns a citizen militia into a professional army of landless men loyal to their general rather than the state. That dramatic image contains a piece of truth, but it is too clean. Rome's army has been changing for generations before Marius commands it. Property qualifications, recruitment practice, equipment, tactical organisation, length of service, overseas campaigning, and the role of volunteers all belong to a long, uneven evolution. The famous Marian reforms are not securely visible as one single revolutionary programme imposed at a stroke. No single explanation fully accounts for the transformation that later seems to gather around his name. But Marius matters greatly because he stands at a moment when the pressures of empire, manpower, ambition, and social insecurity are converging. In 107 before the Common Era, he wins election as consul and receives command in the war against Jugurtha, the king of Numidia in North Africa. The war has already embarrassed Rome. Jugurtha has resisted Roman efforts through mobility, political cunning, local knowledge, and the corruption or incompetence associated with some Roman leaders. Marius needs men. In raising additional forces, he accepts volunteers from among the poorer citizens, men often identified as the capite censi, those counted principally by their persons rather than significant property. Ancient writers treat this as a striking break with custom. Modern historians are more cautious. Poorer men had not been completely absent from Roman military needs before, and a single levy does not instantly rewrite the entire army. Yet the symbolism is powerful. Men with little land or wealth can now see military service not merely as an obligation attached to property, but as a route toward pay, plunder, status, and perhaps a future secured by a successful commander. Such a recruit carries a different vulnerability into service. A landholding citizen returning from campaign hopes to recover his household economy, however strained it may be. A man possessing little may have fewer reasons to long for release into civilian hardship. The army feeds him, pays him when payment arrives, gives him comrades, places weapons in his hands, and allows him to hope that successful service will earn reward. His future may depend less upon a field waiting at home than upon a general able to obtain booty, recognition, discharge benefits, or land for his veterans. This does not mean that soldiers immediately become private servants ready to destroy the Republic at a commander's command. Political loyalty, civic identity, unit pride, personal need, and generalship are far more tangled than that. Yet the relationship has shifted. A soldier whose life after service depends upon the political power of his commander has reason to care intensely about that commander's fortunes. Marius's men in Africa are required to function in a war where movement and endurance matter relentlessly. Jugurtha cannot simply be crushed by one perfect collision of infantry lines. The landscape is broad, difficult, dry, and suited to evasion, sudden attack, rapid movement, and the punishing problems of supply. Roman forces must march, construct camps, secure water, endure heat, guard against surprise, and chase an opponent who understands that delay itself can weaken the invading army. Here emerges the image that will cling to Marius's soldiers, Marius's mules. The name refers to men required to carry their own burdens with such severity that they resemble pack animals. They bear equipment and supplies upon arrangements designed to make a heavily loaded soldier more self-sufficient on the march, reducing some of the encumbrance of baggage and servants and making the army harder, quicker, and less dependent upon comfort. The phrase may have begun as mockery, as many enduring military nicknames do. To call soldiers mules is not initially to praise their nobility. It evokes sweating backs, dull obedience, relentless loads, and the graceless practicality of beasts compelled to keep moving. But within Roman military culture, insult can become pride. A man who carries what others require animals or servants to transport is also a man proving that he can outlast softer troops. The soldier's burden becomes part of his identity. He may curse it on the road, feel the straps slicing his shoulders, and dream of dropping the whole hateful arrangement into a ravine, while still looking with contempt upon an army less prepared to carry its own survival. Marius's mules are not monsters because they enjoy suffering. They become formidable because suffering is made into a badge of competence. Even here, later legends should be handled carefully. Roman soldiers had carried equipment before Marius. Commanders before him had reasons to reduce excessive baggage, force troops into harder habits, and increase marching speed. Ancient armies continually struggle with the same temptation the more comforts. Servants, animals, and private possessions are allowed into a column, the slower and more vulnerable it becomes. Marius may have enforced and popularized a particularly severe version of self-carrying discipline among his forces, and the nickname suggests that contemporaries noticed something memorable. But he did not suddenly invent the idea that an infantryman could be burdened for military advantage. What he represents is the sharpening of an existing Roman demand at a moment when service is becoming longer, harsher, and increasingly attached to soldiers who may make the army their central hope of advancement. The weight these men carry is not only physical. In Africa, success raises Marius into extraordinary prominence, but Rome soon faces a danger far closer and more alarming than Jugurtha. Large migrating groups, conventionally remembered as the Cimbri and Teutonese along with associated peoples, move through parts of Europe and inflict devastating defeats upon Roman forces. In 105 before the Common Era, at Arausio, Roman armies suffer one of the worst catastrophes since Cannae. Ancient casualty figures may be exaggerated, but the scale of the disaster is unmistakable. Italy itself appears threatened. The memory of Hannibal has never vanished. Now fear returns in another form, carried by reports of shattered armies and enormous northern peoples descending toward Roman territory. In crisis, Rome turns repeatedly to Marius. He holds an unprecedented succession of consulships, a sign both of his reputation and of the Republic's alarm. His soldiers are not being prepared for a decorative campaign on a frontier of little consequence. They train under the expectation that failure may open Italy to devastation. Marius is portrayed as drilling them hard, strengthening their endurance, enforcing burdens, and refusing the comfort that weakens readiness. The army waits, marches, digs, learns, and becomes familiar with the commander under whom its survival and glory seem joined. When the confrontation comes, the Teutones are destroyed at Aquae Sextii in 102 before the Common Era, and the Cimbri are defeated at Phasalia in 101. The threatened disaster is reversed. Marius appears not merely successful, but necessary, a saviour whose authority has been forged through armies that endured his hardness and then shared in his triumph. For the soldiers, victory creates expectations. Men who have carried the burdens, dug the camps, faced feared enemies, and preserved Italy do not simply disappear into the crowd when the campaign ends. Many require provision. Veterans without secure property have powerful reasons to expect land or other reward, and Marius has powerful reasons to seek it for them. The question is no longer only whether Rome can recruit poor citizens in time of need. It is what the Republic owes men whose military labour has become their claim upon the future. When distributions of land for veterans become entangled with political violence, popular agitation, senatorial resistance, and the ambitions of powerful leaders, the soldier's dependency upon his commander grows politically explosive. The general who obtains rewards appears as patron and protector. The state that delays or refuses them may seem distant, ungrateful, or controlled by enemies of the men who fought for it. This does not destroy the Republic immediately, nor does every legionary suddenly cease caring about Rome itself. Soldiers can be loyal to country, comrades, commander, and personal interest at the same time, even when those loyalties begin to pull apart. But the old civic ideal has become difficult to sustain without alteration. Rome's empire now requires men who can campaign for prolonged periods across distant lands. Men who serve for prolonged periods reasonably demand security when their service ends. Commanders who lead them to victory become crucial intermediaries between soldiers and that security. Politics begins to enter the camp in a form sharper than speeches that promise that the man at the head of the army may be the only figure capable of delivering what the men beneath him believe they have earned. There is an irony in the nickname of the mule. A mule carries what is loaded upon it and walks where it is driven. Roman elites might prefer soldiers to behave exactly that way, hard-working, silent, obedient, available for wars, and quietly dismissed when their usefulness ends. But the more the Republic depends upon long-serving, hardened men, the less safe it becomes to treat them as animals without desires of their own. The mule has scars, memories, comrades, weapons, and expectations. He knows which commander starved beside him, praised him, led him to victory, or promised him land. He also knows which politicians in Rome speak grandly of duty while arguing against the reward he believes his years have purchased. What survives in the record suggests not a sudden birth of a new army, but a slow, dangerous shift made visible in Marius's career. The soldier remains subjected to weight, drill, discipline, and labour. Yet he is no longer merely the citizen temporarily leaving his independent livelihood to defend the state. Increasingly, he can become a man whose livelihood is created by service, whose future depends on the aftermath of victory, and whose bond with a successful general may grow more immediate than his trust in institutions he rarely sees. The army is becoming more capable of sustained campaigns, precisely as its political position becomes more unstable. The burden pole across the soldier's shoulders therefore carries a meaning larger than pack, pot, cloak, ration, stake, and tool. It carries the future of Roman power and the beginnings of Roman fracture. A heavily loaded soldier can march farther from home. A man who marches farther from home for longer years requires a reason to remain faithful. Marius gives Rome armies fit for its expanding dangers, or at least becomes the name later ages attached to that transformation. But the hard men who return behind him are no longer easy to fold back into the older republic. They have marched as mules, fought as professionals in all but perhaps formal name, and learned that a general may be more able than the state to turn their sacrifice into reward. Soon, another commander will understand that lesson with terrifying clarity. He will inherit soldiers shaped by the long march, the camp, the burden, and the expectation of reward, then carry their endurance into landscapes beyond Italy, with a speed and audacity that astonish even Romans. Under Caesar, the mule soldiers of the late Republic will not merely win campaigns, they will help place the Republic itself beneath the marching feet of its own army. The burdened soldiers who emerge from the age of Marius do not remain long without a commander capable of making their endurance serve an ambition larger than any provincial war. Julius Caesar does not invent the Roman soldier. The heavy march, the fortified camp, the promise of booty, or the dangerous intimacy between victorious general and veteran, he inherits all of them. What he possesses is an unusual ability to combine those elements with speed, spectacle, calculation, and a political hunger never satisfied with the last success. Under Caesar, the legion becomes terrifying not because it changes overnight into a new kind of army, but because trained men are driven with extraordinary relentlessness by a commander who understands how deeply they value recognition and how victory can turn military obedience into personal allegiance. When Caesar receives commands in Gaul in 58 before the Common Era, he is already an ambitious and controversial politician. His provinces offer troops, money, reputation, and the military glory upon which Roman power so often rises. The wars are known most famously through Caesar's own account, written in prose so controlled that campaigns seem to unfold under the guidance of necessity and Roman efficiency. It is an indispensable source, and a dangerous one to read innocently. Caesar is writing about his own actions and wars whose political value to him is immense. He has every reason to portray interventions as justified, enemies as threatening, victories as brilliant, and hardships as proof of his command. Scholars still debate motives, casualty figures, and details. Yet even after every caution, the campaigns reveal an army being pushed to a level of speed, labour, and repeated risk that helps explain why Caesar's soldiers become famous. Gaul is not one helpless country waiting to be conquered. It is a vast region of communities, rival aristocracies, alliances, fortified towns, cavalry traditions, trade, wealth, and changing calculations about Rome. Some peoples work with Caesar against local enemies, then find that Roman aid brings Roman domination. Others resist, submit, or rise again when circumstances change. Caesar uses division as effectively as he uses the sword. The legionary in the ranks experiences this political world in harsher and simpler forms another march, another river, another hill fought, another winter far from home, another report that men once called allies now stand in arms. Speed becomes one of Caesar's signatures. His legions are expected to move before opponents believe they can, to appear during uncertainty, and to deny resistance time to gather. But speed in an ancient army is never merely a general's clever decision. It is imposed upon thousands of bodies. It means reduced rest, controlled baggage, poor roads, uncertain food, failing animals, blistered feet, men arriving exhausted and still being ordered to dig. Caesar's narrative often compresses movement into a clean sequence. Danger is reported. The army marches. The army arrives. Hidden within those sentences are shoulders cut by straps, soldiers swallowing inadequate meals, centurions driving stragglers forward, and the knowledge that all suffering is wasted if the column arrives one day too late. In 57 near the river Sabes, the risk of such campaigning suddenly reveals itself. Caesar's troops are preparing camp and handling baggage when enemy forces strike with alarming speed. The Romans do not receive a comfortable interval in which to build their enclosure, arrange equipment, and meet danger in perfect formation. Units must respond amid interruption and confusion. Caesar's account emphasizes how close the situation comes to disaster and how discipline, standards, officers, and his own presence help restore it. His self-presentation must be remembered, but the episode exposes a genuine truth. The fast-moving army often lives on the edge between initiative and vulnerability. Its soldiers have to form, fight, and recover, while the ordinary work of arrival is still unfinished. His boldest operations turn their labour into public theatre. In 55, Caesar reaches the Rhine and orders a bridge built across it, rather than depending simply upon boats. The structure is an engineering achievement, but also a message shaped from timber and muscle. Peoples beyond the river are meant to understand that the Rhine does not place them beyond Roman reach. The army crosses, campaigns briefly, then withdraws and dismantles the bridge. The lasting conquest is psychological. A barrier believed to protect communities has been converted into a platform for Roman movement, and the legionaries have supplied the hands that make Caesar's warning visible. The expeditions to Britain in 55 and 54 demand another kind of endurance. Sea crossings expose soldiers to storms, damaged ships, difficult landings, supply danger, and an island that appears distant and strange to the Roman imagination. Caesar does not permanently conquer Britain. That lies generations ahead. and the practical achievements of the expeditions are more limited than their drama suggests. But for his reputation and his army's identity, they matter. Men who have campaigned through Gaul, bridged the Rhine, and crossed the Channel begin to see themselves as an exceptional army, serving a commander willing to carry them beyond ordinary boundaries. Shared hardship becomes proof that they belong to something singular. That belief faces its hardest test when Gallic resistance gathers under Vercingetorix in 52. The revolt threatens Caesar not with one isolated enemy, but with wider cooperation, attacks on supply, and a strategy capable of stretching Roman power. At Gergovia, Caesar suffers a serious defeat. His men are not unstoppable, and an aggressive operation against a strong position can fail bloodily. Loyalty built only on effortless victories would not survive such a moment. His army now endures failure. Shortage, uncertainty, and the discovery that opponents have learned to challenge Rome with greater unity. Then comes Alesia. Vercingetorix withdraws into a fortified hilltop stronghold. Caesar encloses him with defensive lines, while a relief army eventually arrives from outside. The Roman soldiers are trapped by their own determination enemies within their works, enemies beyond them, and limited supplies behind walls they have built with their own hands. Ditches, ramparts, towers, sharpened obstacles, and concealed hazards turn ground into a weapon. But every feature demands labour from men who know that failure could leave them crushed between two armies. The engineering is extraordinary, yet for the legionary it is simply fear translated into another task. Cut earth, lift timber, guard the line, sleep briefly, return when the alarm sounds. At the height of the assaults, the soldier does not see the celebrated plan visible on later maps. He sees one threatened point, men pushing toward the ditch, missiles falling, comrades straining to keep the line from opening. Caesar presents himself as riding to places of danger, recognisable to his men, directing reserves and sharing the crisis beneath their eyes. The details may be sharpened by self-promotion, but the importance of visibility is real. His soldiers do not experience the Senate as a living presence on the rampart. They experience their commander, the man who knows their record, distributes rewards, and seems to share the gamble that may destroy them. Victory at Alesia is a victory of Roman training and Roman labour, but it is also absorbed into the personal legend of Caesar. The conquest of Gaul brings devastation on an enormous scale. Communities are besieged, burned, enslaved, scattered, or punished. Farms and stores become military resources. Families endure the consequences of Rome's persistence. Caesar's reported numbers of slain or enslaved enemies are not always dependable, but the violence itself is beyond doubt. The endurance admired in the legions cannot be separated from what it enables. Men trained to march farther, build faster, and obey longer allow Roman power to reach deeper into other people's lives, and to impose destruction with unusual persistence. After years of campaigning, Caesar's soldiers are veterans not merely in time served, but in shared identity. They have crossed rivers, endured winters, stormed settlements, built extraordinary works, recovered from reverses, and helped make their commander one of the most powerful men alive. They have received loot and promises, but their future remains uncertain. In Rome, Caesar's enemies seek to separate him from command and expose him to political destruction. Caesar refuses to yield himself unprotected. Between these rival ambitions stands an army accustomed to seeing its general as both author of victory and guardian of the reward expected after it. When he crosses the Rubicon in 49, the old routines turn inward. The movement is physically small, but its meaning is immense. Roman soldiers now march against a Roman political order in the name of a Roman commander. Speed again serves Caesar as Italy shifts before his advance, and opponents withdraw, rather than meet his veterans immediately. His men may persuade themselves that they defend justice, the general's rights, their own rewards, or the republic against corrupt rivals. Human loyalty rarely announces itself in one simple sentence, but the boundary has been crossed. The institution trained to protect Roman power has become strong enough to decide who controls it. Civil war does not spare these veterans because they are experienced. In Spain, maneuver, flooded rivers, interrupted supply, camps, and hunger determine much of the struggle against Pompeian armies. In the Balkans, near Dyrrhachium, Caesar attempts enclosing works against Pompey and pushes his men through severe shortage. Later stories describe soldiers surviving on rough substitutes for grain, and even displaying their miserable food defiantly to enemies. As though hunger proves them impossible to break, the story may have acquired dramatic polish, but the ideal is revealing Caesar's troops are expected to make deprivation part of their pride. Yet Dyrrhachium is a failure, and the army comes close to disaster. Endurance keeps men in a war, it does not make their commander incapable of mistakes. Their loyalty also has limits. Long service, deferred rewards, repeated danger, and fatigue can provoke unrest. Caesar faces mutinous soldiers who demand what they believe is owed to them. Later accounts preserve the striking story that he calls rebellious veterans not fellow soldiers but citizens, offering discharge in a word that removes the identity on which their pride has come to depend. The episode may be refined by later admiration for his command of men, yet its meaning is credible. These veterans do not simply want freedom from service, they want reward, recognition, and their place in the final victory of an army whose history now feels like their own. Caesar has made himself central to all three. This is the transformation hidden inside the march. The soldier who once learned to carry his burden for Rome still digs, starves, fights, obeys, and survives through Roman discipline. but the loyalty sustaining those acts has shifted dangerously toward the general who has shared his years of risk and who appears able to secure his future. The Republic trained men capable of enduring almost anything for Roman power. Caesar discovers that the same men can endure almost anything to determine who possesses Roman power. They are not monsters without needs or choices. They are aging veterans with scars, grievances, pride, comrades, expectations, and few easy paths back to the civilian lives they left behind. Behind them lie winters in Gaul, trenches at Alesia, hunger and civil war, and the accumulated proof that they can survive the unbearable. Ahead lie promises of land, pay, status, rest, or another battle. Between past suffering and hoped for reward stands Caesar, asking once more for movement and faith. Under him, Rome's hardest soldiers do not merely conquer foreign enemies, they carry one Roman's ambition over the boundaries of the Republic, using the strength that Rome itself spent generations teaching them to possess. All the years of marching, digging, training, punishment, hunger, reward, loyalty, and fear eventually contract into a very small space. It is the distance between one shield and another. A veteran who has crossed Gaul with Caesar, cut trenches around an enemy hilltop, endured civil war, and followed standards through dust and winter may carry an entire history inside him. But when battle closes, that history must express itself through a few immediate actions: keep the shield up. Keep his footing, stay with the men beside him, strike when an opening appears, do not turn, do not fall, do not let fear outrun training. The battles that make commanders famous are experienced by ordinary soldiers not as grand movements on a map, but as heat, noise, pressure, breath, blindness, and the unbearable proximity of another man attempting to kill them. Before the collision, there is often waiting. Later, art loves the instant of impact, but soldiers may stand for long periods first, adjusting equipment, swallowing thirst, listening for orders, watching enemy lines take shape. The waiting itself consumes strength. The sun bears down on helmet and armour. A shield grows heavy before it has stopped a blow. A man's mouth dries even if he has recently drunk. He hears sounds sharpened by expectation horses shifting, standards moving. Officers shouting, missiles prepared, distant insults, perhaps prayers, perhaps the low movement of thousands of feet. The enemy line may be close enough for faces to become visible, and that recognition changes everything. The opposing force is no longer rumour or strategy. It is composed of men who have also been ordered to stand, men who may look frightened, furious, exhausted, determined, or horribly calm. Fear is not a defect in such a moment. It is the body understanding the situation correctly. A soldier who feels nothing when faced with missiles, blades, trampling, and the possibility of dying far from home would be the strange one. Roman training does not eliminate fear. It attempts to prevent fear from taking command. The soldier has been taught what to do with his hands while his mind is crowded by possibilities. He knows where his unit belongs, where the standard stands. What signals may come, how to handle his shield and weapon, how to move with companions. In calm conditions, these lessons can appear almost dull. In the moment before contact, they become something like a narrow path across an abyss. A man may not be able to control his terror, but he may still be able to obey the next motion. Missiles can disturb that fragile control before lines meet. Javelins, spears, arrows, sling stones, and other projectiles do more than wound. They make men flinch, compress, hesitate, raise shields awkwardly, lose alignment, or step instinctively away from danger. A shield struck hard can twist the arm or block vision. A missile entering a thigh or face can reduce confidence in the men who witness it, before they have touched the enemy themselves. The Roman use of heavy javelins is part of this violent preparation. The ideal sequence is simple enough approach in order: cast at effective range, unsettle or damage the opposing line, then close quickly before it recovers. Actual battle is rarely ideal. Throws fall short, men release too early, uneven terrain breaks timing, opponents do not react as expected, and fear disrupts even practiced movement, but the intent remains clear. The battle is partly decided by what happens to a formation's nerve before the swords begin. Then comes contact, and much of what people imagine about ancient combat becomes misleading. There may be shouts, charges, wild blows, acts of extraordinary bravery, and sudden killing. But prolonged fighting between organised infantry cannot consist only of endless frantic hacking. Human bodies cannot maintain that kind of maximum violence for long, especially after marching in equipment and carrying shields beneath heat. Close combat likely expands and contracts, with pressure, brief surges, moments of separation, missile use, replacement, shouting, advancing, recoiling, and localised crises that may spread if one side senses weakness. Our sources rarely describe these mechanics with the clarity modern readers want. Ancient writers care about generals, turning points, speeches, miracles of courage, and the moral meaning of victory. Scholars still debate exactly how Roman lines relieved tired men during battle, how regularly rotation occurred, and how continuous close fighting truly was. No single reconstruction fully accounts for every battlefield, era, enemy, and terrain. What is certain is that combat tests endurance and order as much as individual aggression. The shield becomes the soldier's world. Behind it, he sees only fragments and enemy weapon appearing at an edge, a face over a rim, a comrade stumbling sideways, dust lifting at foot level, a gap opening where no gap should be. The shield protects, but it also confines. It restricts movement and narrows sight. It must absorb blows that numb the arm and hammer through the shoulder. In a press of bodies, a man may be shoved from behind by companions who cannot see what prevents movement ahead. He may stumble on loose ground, discarded equipment, a wounded man, or a corpse not yet recognizable as anyone he knew. The sword in his other hand is no glorious extension of freedom. It operates in whatever limited opening the shield and crush of bodies permit. A compact thrust, practiced so relentlessly against wooden posts, now acquires its true meaning. There is little elegance in it. The soldier may strike beneath an enemy shield, into a belly, groin, thigh, exposed side, or neck. He may feel resistance unlike anything offered by wood. He may see the result for only a second before the pressure closes again. A wounded enemy does not necessarily fall quietly or immediately. He may scream, grapple, strike desperately, or collapse beneath feet where neither line can easily avoid him. Roman fighting technique is often celebrated for efficiency, but efficiency in this context is not clean. It means inflicting disabling injuries in cramped space, while trying not to receive the same. It means killing so close that a man cannot preserve any comforting distance from what his training has prepared him to do. Armour helps, but it does not create safety. Helmets deflect some blows, body protection may stop or reduce others, shields save lives constantly, and good equipment can decide whether an impact becomes a bruise or a fatal wound. Yet no ancient soldier is sealed away from vulnerability. Faces, throats, arms, hands, legs, feet, armpits, and gaps in protection remain exposed. A strong impact can injure without penetrating. A man knocked down in a crowded fight is in terrible danger regardless of the quality of his armour. Equipment fails, straps break, shields split or become too damaged to use effectively. A soldier may enter the fight physically sound and within moments find his ability to stand, see, grip, or breathe slipping away. The wounded create a crisis far larger than their number. A dead man at least ceases moving. A wounded comrade may fall backward into the rank, cling to others, cry for help, block movement, terrify recruits, and force men to confront what may happen to them next. Roman military medicine and evacuation practices vary across periods and situations, and the battlefield is rarely kind enough to allow orderly rescue during the most intense fighting. Later forts and military contexts reveal medical instruments and evidence of treatment, showing that armies cared about preserving injured men who could be saved. But in the crush of combat, there is no guarantee of immediate help. A soldier may see a friend disappear beneath the feet of advancing ranks, because stopping for him would endanger everyone still standing. This is one reason experienced men matter so much. The veteran has not become indifferent. If anything, he may understand danger more clearly than the recruit. He knows how quickly a battle can turn. He has heard the sound a line makes when it begins to lose confidence. He recognizes panic not only in screams, but in tiny movements, shields drifting backward, men glancing behind themselves, gaps widening, orders repeated too urgently. He may also know that the most frightening moment can pass if men remain in place a little longer. An opponent is tired too. The enemy's shield arms burn, their injured are falling, their leaders are trying to keep them from sensing weakness. A line sometimes breaks not because every man is defeated, but because enough men decide at almost the same time that defeat has already begun. When that decision spreads, the nature of killing changes. Two ordered lines facing one another are terrifying, but both still possess protection, cohesion, and some ability to resist. Men who turn to flee expose backs, discard heavy shields, collide with their own companions, lose officers and standards, and become individual bodies hunted by men who still retain order. Ancient casualty patterns often suggest that the greatest slaughter happens after one side collapses, rather than during the earlier controlled struggle. The Roman soldier is trained to prevent that collapse in his own ranks, and exploit it in others. This is the brutal reward for obedience if he holds long enough for the enemy to lose formation first. The moment of greatest danger may suddenly become a pursuit in which Roman discipline produces terrible advantage. Yet Rome is not always the side still standing. At Cannae, disciplined soldiers are enclosed and butchered in forests, mountain passes, deserts, marshes, and civil wars. Roman formations fail, panic, become isolated, or die where training cannot create an escape. At the Teutoburg forest in the early imperial period, Roman troops will be attacked in difficult terrain, amid rain, baggage, and broken movement. Unable to bring their ideal battle order fully to bear before 3 legions are destroyed. That later disaster belongs to another political age, but it repeats an old warning. The legionary is formidable when his system functions, and desperately vulnerable when terrain surprise, leadership failure, or enemy planning prevents it from doing so. The popular image of Roman infantry advancing like an invincible machine forgets that machines can jam, fragment, and be dismantled piece by piece. Even in victory, battle leaves no man untouched. After the enemy has fled or fallen, the field remains. The soldier who only hours earlier concentrated on the shield before him now sees the larger result bodies tangled where lines met, men calling weakly for water, equipment scattered across blood-darkened ground, wounded animals, broken weapons, standards being recovered, officers trying to restore order before plunder and chaos loosen the army. Some wounded enemies may be killed, others captured, some Roman injured treated if they can be reached and saved. Ancient warfare does not reliably offer mercy, and the conditions after battle can be as terrible as the contest itself. A victory announced in Rome with ceremonies and praise is, for the men who won it, also a landscape of people who were alive that morning. A soldier then has to live with what his training allowed him to do. Roman sources do not give ordinary infantrymen much room to describe fear afterward, recurring memories, grief, guilt, relief, or the strange emptiness following survival. They celebrate courage, sacrifice, and victory more readily than they examine the inner cost of killing at arm's length. But human beings do not cease to be human because ancient writers say little about their wounds of memory. Some men may feel exultant, some numb, some sickened, some proud, some grateful only to be alive. Many surely move between such feelings without language that survives for us. The army offers rituals, rewards, comradeship, drink, work, and another march. It does not offer the soldier a return to the person who existed before he first saw a trained motion enter living flesh. This is what the long Roman preparation is truly for, not dazzling swordplay, not theatrical duels, not the myth of men made incapable of terror, but the preservation of useful action inside circumstances designed to overwhelm human action entirely. The march has taught the soldier to move while tired. The camp has taught him to labour while empty. Discipline has taught him to obey while resentful or afraid. The practice post has taught his hand the shortest route to violence on the battlefield. All these lessons meet, and even then they may fail. But when they hold, a frightened, exhausted, vulnerable man can remain in line long enough for the frightened, exhausted, vulnerable men opposite him to break first. When the standards move again after the field is cleared, the surviving legionary carries a different burden from the one loaded onto his marching pole. His equipment can be repaired, his sword can be cleaned, his shield can be replaced. What cannot be easily set down is the knowledge of what battle actually demanded, and of how much Roman victory depends on ordinary men enduring that demand together. The surviving legionary does not leave the battlefield alone. Around him move men whom later images of Roman war often push into the shadows, attendants searching for equipment and wounded masters, medical orderlies trying to decide whom time still permits them to save, cavalry returning from pursuit, allied or auxiliary infantry gathering themselves after fighting in weapons and languages different from those of the citizen legions, engineers examining damaged works, mule handlers struggling to recover terrified animals, servants carrying water, officers counting losses, and camp followers waiting for news that may destroy the narrow world they have built beside the army. The famous legionary with shield and sword stands at the centre of Roman military legend because he is visually simple, recognisably Roman, and easy to turn into an emblem. But no legion marches, camps, eats, scouts, heals, builds, communicates, breeds horses, repairs equipment, or occupies a frontier alone. The machine that makes him dangerous is far wider than the man beneath the rectangular shield. Even in the Republic, Rome's armies have never been composed only of Roman citizens fighting in isolation. The allied communities of Italy provide immense numbers of men, sometimes matching or exceeding the citizen contingents placed in the field. These allies supply infantry and, crucially, forms of cavalry in which Rome often depends heavily upon others. They endure campaigns, stand in lines, die in ambushes, and help create the victories that later triumphs associate first with Roman commanders and Roman institutions. Yet they do not always enjoy equal rewards or equal political standing. Their blood is essential to Roman expansion, while their relationship to Roman citizenship remains limited, negotiated, and increasingly resented. The men erased from the clean popular image of early Roman conquest are therefore not peripheral assistants. They are one of its foundations. Rome conquers much of the Mediterranean with the strength of Italy. While keeping the highest political privileges concentrated in Rome until that imbalance becomes unbearable, when Italian allied resentment eventually erupts in the social war at the beginning of the 1st century before the Common Era, Rome confronts the terrible consequences of having trained and relied upon men who know its methods well enough to fight it. The war is vicious because both sides understand much about the same military culture. Rome survives, but the political settlement transforms the relationship by extending Roman citizenship through much of Italy. The old distinction between Roman legionary and Italian ally changes fundamentally, yet the need for troops with differing skills does not disappear. As Roman rule extends far beyond Italy, the army draws increasingly upon peoples across the provinces and borderlands, creating the vast auxiliary world that will stand beside the legions under the emperors. An auxiliary soldier may be recruited from a community whose military reputation fits a Roman-need cavalry, from regions associated with skilled horsemanship, archers from places with deep projectile traditions, light infantry familiar with particular terrain, spearmen, scouts, slingers, and other troops whose methods broaden the army beyond the heavy infantryman's close-range violence. The categories are never perfectly fixed. Men can serve far from their places of origin. Units can preserve an ethnic name long after their composition changes, and Roman training gradually shapes troops from many backgrounds into an imperial military system. Still, the auxiliary forces give Rome something the legionary alone cannot provide in sufficient quantity. An army made only of heavy infantry, however disciplined, is incomplete. It needs eyes, reach, speed, pursuit, screening, missile fire, and men whose service can extend Roman authority while also drawing provincial populations into the empire's rewards and risks. For many non-citizen auxiliaries of the early empire, long service can eventually lead to Roman citizenship upon honourable discharge, often extending benefits to children under changing regulations. This is no small matter. A man may spend decades guarding a river frontier or marching in distant campaigns, living under military discipline far from the landscape of his birth, and emerge formally incorporated into the Roman civic world whose army he served. The bargain is hard, and survival is never guaranteed. Service may consume the strongest years of his life. He may die of disease in a fort before receiving any reward. But the promise helps explain why Rome's armies can recruit beyond Italy, and turn service into a pathway of integration as well as coercion. The empire does not merely occupy conquered peoples, it learns selectively and unequally to arm some of them, depend upon them, and reward them with a place inside the structure they protect. Cavalry exposes the limits of the legionary myth especially sharply. A heavily equipped infantry force can hold ground and destroy enemies at close range, but it cannot easily see beyond hills, run down fleeing opponents, counter mobile raiders, screen a march, carry messages quickly, or survive against every mounted threat without horsemen of its own. At Cannae, Roman infantry courage is made nearly irrelevant once Hannibal's cavalry helps close the trap behind it. On eastern frontiers, Rome faces opponents for whom horse archery and armoured cavalry can shape entire battles. In open country, infantry that cannot force a mobile enemy to close may find itself wounded, exhausted, and strategically helpless. Roman cavalry, allied cavalry, and auxiliary mounted units therefore operate not as decorative wings to the real army, but as part of its ability to know where danger is, prevent surprise, exploit victory, and resist enemies who refuse to fight on infantry terms. Archers and slingers matter for the same reason. The popular legionary appears in imagination advancing with shield, heavy javelin, and sword, as though Roman war always waits for the distance to close. Yet enemies often must be reached, disturbed, driven from walls, denied high ground, or punished before close combat can begin. Archers from eastern provinces, slingers associated particularly with places such as the Balearic Islands. And other missile troops extend Roman violence far beyond the stabbing range of the sword. At a siege, they can suppress defenders while engineers and assault troops approach. In field operations, they can trouble cavalry, defend positions, and disrupt formations. Their work is less easy to romanticize in the familiar image of disciplined shield walls, but it is essential whenever an enemy has the good sense not to walk obediently into the legionary's strongest distance. Then there are the builders, though the line between soldier and engineer is not clean. Ordinary legionaries dig, lift, cut, haul, and construct as part of military service. But complex operations also require men with unusual technical ability: surveyors, craftsmen, artillery specialists, bridge builders, miners, carpenters, smiths, armourers, and those skilled in the operation or repair of machines. A siege engine that throws a stone or bolt is not summoned into existence by Roman genius as an abstract quality. Timber must be found and shaped, metal fittings must be produced and preserved, cordage must be prepared, measurements must work, transport must reach the site, experienced hands must assemble, aim, repair, and operate the device while missiles fall from the walls above. Every Roman siege celebrated as a triumph of determination also depends on skilled labour that cannot be replaced simply by giving more swords to more men. The same is true of forts and frontiers. Once territory is conquered, victory must be converted into presence, walls rise, roads connect posts, workshops maintain weapons, granaries preserve food, bathhouses, drains, stables, headquarters buildings, signal stations, watchtowers, bridges, and ports make the military landscape durable. A frontier fort is not only a box filled with waiting fighters, it is a settlement organised around the permanent management of danger. Some men patrol, some train, some repair, some keep records, some care for animals, some handle supplies, some supervise building, and all depend upon systems that can fail in quiet ways long before an enemy attacks. A fort without adequate grain, clean water, usable footwear, repaired weapons, or fit horses may be defeated by neglect before it is tested by battle. Medicine stands within this hidden army as one of its bleakest necessities. Roman soldiers are trained to injure human bodies, but the state also has a reason to preserve bodies in which it has invested years of pay, food, equipment, and instruction. Military medical care develops practical organisation, with medical personnel attached to forces and in many permanent forts, buildings identified as hospitals where injured or ill soldiers might be treated. The knowledge available is limited by ancient understanding, and infection remains an unpredictable killer. Surgery without modern anaesthesia or germ theory is a horrifying prospect. Many wounds that appear survivable to later eyes can become fatal, yet the presence of medical specialists matters immensely to the soldier. After battle, a man with a deep cut, embedded missile, crushed limb, infected wound, fever, damaged eye, or broken bone is not automatically abandoned to fate. Skilled attention may allow him to return to service or at least to life. The medic's world is far removed from triumphal glory. He sees the battle after its stories have been stripped away, exposed bone, torn muscle, shattered teeth, abdominal wounds no treatment can redeem, men begging to keep limbs that cannot be saved, men silent because shock has taken speech from them. He must decide quickly, work amid blood and dirt, and understand that saving one body often means preparing it to return to the same system that broke it. What survives in the record suggests that Roman armies recognized the value of treatment and organized care more seriously than the simple image of ancient brutality might imply. But care does not soften the institution's purpose. The army heals soldiers because it needs soldiers, and because men more willingly endure danger when they believe they will not be discarded the moment they fall. Beyond formal soldiers stand servants, slaves, mule drivers, traders, craftsmen, labourers, and the shifting population that follows military life. Roman commanders repeatedly worry about baggage becoming excessive, because where an army goes, private needs multiply. Officers may travel with servants and belongings. Soldiers purchase food, drink, clothing, sex, repairs, charms, and small comforts where markets emerge near camps. Animals require handlers and fodder, captives require guarding. Traders see profit in men who receive pay and crave relief from monotony and fear. Regulations may attempt to restrain this moving civilian world, especially when mobility or discipline is threatened, but it cannot be eliminated. An army is composed of human beings, and human beings carry appetite, affection, dependency, greed, loneliness, and domestic habit into even the most severe military environment. On imperial frontiers, this truth becomes impossible to hide. Although soldiers in parts of the early imperial period faced legal restrictions on recognised marriage during service, many still form lasting relationships with women and father children. Around forts grow settlements populated by families, merchants, veterans, artisans, labourers, innkeepers, and people whose fortunes are tied to the pay and presence of the garrison. A soldier stationed for years along a cold northern wall. A desert route, or a river frontier, is not always simply waiting in masculine isolation for the next invasion. He may have a partner nearby, a child who knows the fort's outline as home, debts with a local trader, friendships with civilians, and a future tied less to the place from which he was recruited than to the community that has formed around his posting. This is one of the most revealing corrections to the myth of soldiers trained into monsters. The frontier is not occupied only by hard men staring into wilderness. It contains cooking pots, children's shoes, letters asking for clothing, complaints about supplies, festivals, religious dedications, local marriages, illnesses, business arrangements, gossip, grief, and the everyday compromises through which imperial violence becomes ordinary life. A fort can represent conquest to the people beyond its walls and home to the child growing up in its shadow. A soldier can be an agent of Roman domination and also a worried father, a sick patient, a customer unable to find decent food, or a veteran hoping his years of obedience will permit a settled old age. These realities do not excuse the Empire's violence. They show how deeply that violence is woven into human lives. The evidence remains incomplete, especially for the countless unnamed people who supplied, loved, treated, served, or followed armies without leaving celebrated accounts. Elite authors prefer generals and battles. Monuments favour victory. But no honest reconstruction of Roman military power can leave these people outside the frame. The legionary does not become effective through his own discipline alone. He's fed by supply systems, supported by animals and handlers, protected by scouts and cavalry, strengthened by archers and specialist troops, kept equipped by craftsmen, saved when possible by medical care, and surrounded by communities that absorb both his wages and his wounds. The red-cloaked figure of modern imagination is therefore only the visible edge of something larger. Rome's army is not a single type of man drilled until he becomes relentless. It is an entire moving society trained, recruited, compelled, purchased, rewarded, attached, and built around war. Behind every sword thrust lies an archer on a wall line, a horseman searching the horizon, a smith repairing iron, a doctor washing a wound, a woman waiting outside the fort, a child learning the language of soldiers, and an unknown labourer leading an animal loaded with the food that keeps the standards moving. Rome's military monster, if the word is used at all, is not the legionary alone. It is the vast human world arranged behind him, making it possible for him to stand in danger again tomorrow. The vast human world behind the Roman soldier does not survive evenly. Most of the voices that once filled a camp are gone, the curses of men lifting wet timber, the complaints of an auxiliary cavalryman whose horse has gone lame, the grief of a woman waiting near a frontier fort, the nervous jokes of recruits before their first watch, the exhausted breathing of the wounded. Time does not preserve experience simply because it mattered. It preserves what chance, soil, fire, water, abandonment, burial, and later human disturbance allow to remain. A famous battle may be remembered in books while the daily life of the soldiers who fought it disappears almost entirely. A commander's victory may be carved in stone, while thousands of private fears vanish without a line. Yet the Roman army has left behind an immense scattered trail of evidence, and when that trail is followed carefully, the monster of legend becomes something more complex and more convincing: a body with sore feet. Damaged teeth, repaired equipment, debts, letters, poor meals, old injuries, and routines so deeply embedded in the land that even after 2,000 years the ground has not entirely forgotten them. A marching camp may be one of the faintest of those traces. The soldiers who raise it intend no monument. They need shelter and security for a night or a short period. Then they dismantle what can be carried, shoulder their burdens, and leave. The ditch slowly fills, rain softens the rampart, vegetation returns. Later farmers plough across the lines, roads, buildings, and fields conceal the temporary geometry of an army that once arrived, dug, slept, guarded itself, and moved on. Some camps are known from surviving earthworks, especially in landscapes where later disturbance has been limited. Others emerge only through aerial photography, changes in crop growth, geophysical survey, or an archaeologist recognizing a suspiciously Roman arrangement of ditches. The most striking thing about these sites is often their brevity. Men may have struggled for hours to create them, perhaps while hungry and under threat, yet what remains is only a pale line, an angle in a field, a shallow cut in the earth. It is a suitable memorial to military discipline, vast effort expended on something intended to be abandoned as soon as it had done its work. At more permanent forts, the evidence thickens, stone foundations, timber buildings preserved in damp ground, gates, barracks, granaries, workshops, headquarters buildings, hospitals, bathhouses, wells, drains, rubbish pits, latrines, ovens, stables, shrines, and roads reveal that Roman military life cannot be reduced to battle. The fort is an organism. Grain has to be stored above damp and vermin, weapons and armour require repair, boots wear out, animals must be housed, watered and fed, and sick men need somewhere to lie, orders must be written, copied, delivered, and recorded. Men must bathe when conditions permit, relieve themselves, cook, worship, gamble, quarrel, purchase goods, and endure stretches of boredom interrupted by danger. A wall may impress visitors, but a granary can tell as much about military survival. A sword cannot hold a frontier if the men carrying it have no bread. The northern frontier of Roman Britain has yielded some of the most human evidence of this hidden life. At Vindolanda, south of what would later become Hadrian's Wall, waterlogged conditions preserve thin wooden writing tablets containing ordinary military and private correspondence from the late 1st and early 2nd centuries. These are not grand histories polished for senatorial readers. They are scraps of administration and daily need duty lists, requests, supply matters, reports, invitations, clothing concerns, personal greetings, and traces of individuals trying to live in a cold and remote post. One famous invitation from a commander's wife to another woman for a birthday celebration gives a rare glimpse of female relationships within the world surrounding the fort. Other texts speak more directly to the soldier's discomfort, including requests involving socks, sandals, and undergarments. Details almost comically ordinary until one imagines a man on a wet northern frontier whose feet have become the point at which imperial ambition meets freezing mud. Such tablets strip away the smooth armour of legend. The soldier is still part of an imperial occupation, still serving a system capable of enormous violence, but he is not a silent figurine. He wants warm clothing, he needs leave or supplies, he is assigned tasks, he may owe money, he may complain, he is watched by officers, served by clerks, tied to friendships and household connections. One of the most revealing aspects of the Vindolanda evidence is not that soldiers suffer extraordinary drama every day, but that much of their life consists of ordinary concerns under extraordinary circumstances. The Roman military machine works because it manages thousands of mundane needs with enough success to keep men in place along a frontier far from the Mediterranean centre of power. Footwear tells a similar story without words. Roman military sites have produced sandals, boots, soles, fragments of leather, and countless hobnails. At Vindolanda, footwear survives in remarkable abundance, including shoes associated not only with soldiers but also with women and children living within or near the military community. The smallest shoes are especially powerful. They reveal that frontier life is not merely a row of armed men facing outward, but a settled human environment in which families occupy the spaces created by military presence. For the soldier himself, a shoe is a piece of essential equipment more truthful than ceremonial armour. It bears wear patterns, repairs, stretched leather, lost studs, and the shape of distance. A decorated helmet may survive because it was treasured or buried in unusual circumstances. A worn sole survives as evidence that someone had to walk the empire mile by mile. Weapons and armour are more dramatic finds, but they too require caution. A helmet recovered from a river, a sword from a grave or fort, sections of armour, shield fittings, javelin heads, arrowheads, sling bullets, and artillery bolts can illuminate changes in equipment and the kinds of violence soldiers prepared to deliver. They can also tempt modern observers into imagining uniformity, where the reality is messier. Roman equipment changes across centuries. Men use items from different workshops. Periods, regions, and circumstances. Armour is repaired, reused, modified, lost, captured, deposited as offerings, abandoned in emergencies, or discarded when no longer worth saving. The perfectly matching legion portrayed in modern entertainment is often more orderly than an actual army would have looked. Roman soldiers share systems of training and supply, but they are not always identical figures pressed from one mould. Even the famous segmented body armour associated with imperial legionaries, with its bands of metal curving around the torso, does not define all Roman soldiers or all Roman eras. Mail remains widely used. Scale armour appears. Auxiliary troops are not simply unarmoured supporting extras. Officers, cavalry, infantry, standard bearers, and specialists may present varied appearances. Equipment depends on date, duty, resources, status, local supply, loss, repair, and personal circumstance. Archaeology forces the imagination to become less neat, and therefore more real. The Roman army's power does not depend on every soldier looking identical. It depends on enough men having usable equipment, understood roles, practiced habits, and institutions capable of replacing what war and wear consume. Bones are quieter evidence and more unsettling. Human remains from military contexts. Cemeteries, battlefields, forts, and frontier settlements can reveal injuries, disease, diet, physical strain, origins, and patterns of life that written accounts rarely pause to notice. A skeleton may show healed fractures, indicating that a person survived serious injury and lived long enough for bone to knit. Degeneration in joints and spines can suggest years of heavy physical labour and load-bearing. Trauma from weapons may preserve the instant violence ended a life or permanently damaged it. Teeth record episodes of diet, disease, and childhood stress long before a man entered service. Isotopic and other scientific analyses can sometimes show that individuals buried near a fort were not local, strengthening the picture of an army moving people enormous distances through recruitment, posting, enslavement, family connection, or trade. Yet bones do not always identify a man neatly as a legionary, auxiliary, servant, veteran, civilian, captive, or family member. A grave near a military site may contain someone whose relationship to the fort is difficult to recover. A healed injury does not state whether it came from battle, training, accident, punishment, or civilian violence. A damaged spine does not announce which burdens were carried or for how many miles. The evidence remains incomplete. And responsible interpretation resists turning every scar into a dramatic military story. Still, taken together, skeletal remains challenge the image of soldiers as untouched engines of conquest. Their bodies carry costs wear, fracture, infection, nutritional strain, violence, and mortality. The hard Roman soldier is not hard because damage fails to reach him. He is hard because many are expected to continue carrying damage until they cannot. Animal bones and food remains fill in another layer of the story. Rubbish pits at military sites may contain cattle, sheep, pig, poultry, fish, shellfish, grains, fruit stones, imported goods, broken containers, cooking waste, and evidence of diet shaped by supply, local environment, rank, opportunity, and trade. Roman soldiers do not live only on a simple heroic ration of grain and water, nor do they feast effortlessly from imperial abundance. Diet varies. Frontier supply networks can be surprisingly far-reaching, moving oil, wine, fish products, ceramics, grain, and luxury items over great distances, while ordinary men still experience shortages, monotony, inferior quality, or the difficulty of preparing food in poor conditions. The rubbish heap exposes both organisation and inequality. Empire can deliver familiar flavours to remote forts, but it cannot make every soldier comfortable or every campaign well supplied. Inscriptions present another face of military life, the one soldiers, units, families, and officials wish to leave visible. Tombstones show men identified by unit, origin, years of service, age, rank, or relationships. Military diplomas record citizenship grants and legal privileges for discharged auxiliaries. Altars and dedications reveal soldiers appealing to gods from Rome, local regions, Eastern cults, Celtic traditions, African backgrounds. And private forms of belief carried across the empire. A man recruited far from the place he dies may leave behind a stone stating where he came from and whom he served, compressing a life of marching, cold, fear, friendship, and duty into a few formal lines. Such inscriptions are invaluable, but they are also selective. They preserve those whose commemoration could be paid for or arranged, and they often emphasize honourable identity over suffering. A tombstone names the unit. It does not describe the night the dead man woke screaming from a battle he survived years earlier. Written historians carry their own distortions. Polybius admires Roman organisation and discipline in the Republic. Caesar writes his campaigns with himself at their centre. Livy constructs moral history from Rome's past. Tacitus exposes corruption, fear, rebellion, and imperial tension with brilliance, but not without literary design. Vegetius, writing much later, laments decline and idealises older military rigour, providing crucial details while also speaking from a world distant from the army of the early Republic or Caesar. None can simply be discarded. Without them, the Roman army becomes far harder to understand, but none should be treated as a window without glass. Ancient authors write for purposes praise, warning, self-defence, political judgment, entertainment, moral instruction, grief, or nostalgia. When they say Roman soldiers trained harder than others, punished failure, marched with heavy loads, or achieved remarkable feats. Archaeology can sometimes support the broader picture. It can also complicate it, showing variation, ordinary life, women and children, mixed equipment, local adaptation, injury, and the heavy supporting world left outside the glorious narrative. Modern legend chooses the sharpest pieces and often leaves the rest behind. It remembers the legionary's discipline but forgets his sick days. It remembers the shield wall but forgets the supply clerk. It remembers decimation but imagines it everywhere. It remembers the sword thrust but not the injured hand, the worn sandal, or the camp latrine. It remembers Caesar's speed but not the Gallic communities crushed beneath it. It remembers frontier forts as hard outposts of civilization, without asking how conquest felt to those living under their patrols. The soldier becomes easier to admire when polished into a machine, because a machine needs neither sympathy nor moral scrutiny. It simply performs. The surviving evidence refuses that simplicity. A lost shoe says the march hurt. A letter asking for clothing says the frontier was cold. A ditch says exhausted men still dug. A healed bone says someone endured injury and remained alive inside the military world. A diploma says service could transform legal status. A child's sandal says the army carried families and futures with it. A weapon lodged in earth says training eventually became violence against a real body. A massive burn destruction in a conquered settlement says Roman effectiveness had victims whose stories may survive only in ruin. What emerges is not a diminished Roman soldier, but a more formidable and troubling one. He's not superhuman. He's trained, fed when supply permits, punished when authority demands, cared for when the army finds it worthwhile, supported by countless others, exposed to terrible injury, and made capable of extraordinary labour through systems both efficient and cruel. The mystery of Roman military power does not require a secret lost technique or a breed of men stronger than those they fought. It lies in the accumulation of ordinary evidence, each fragment showing how much effort was required to make a human being continue the nail in the shoe, the grain in the granary, the order scratched onto wood, the ditch visible beneath crops, the scar grown into bone. Across the former Roman world, the ground still holds these fragments, beneath farms, towns, riverbanks, deserts, roads, and hillsides are the discarded traces of men once ordered to be relentless. The empire they served has vanished as a political power, but the material residue of its demands remains. It tells a quieter truth than the triumphal arch. Rome's soldiers did not conquer because they were monsters. They appeared monstrous because an immense institution learned, with ruthless patience, how to extract endurance from vulnerable bodies and leave its evidence everywhere their feet had passed. The fragments left in soil reveal how Rome trained, supplied, punished, repaired, and remembered its soldiers. They also reveal something the triumphal version of the army prefers not to admit. Every system that extracts endurance from human bodies eventually encounters limits it cannot simply order away. A sandal can be replaced until there is no leather available. A wounded man can be treated until infection takes him. A frontier fort can be supplied until roads fail. Pay is delayed. Harvests collapse. Enemies interrupt transport. Or the state must choose which threatened region can be allowed to go without help. A soldier can be driven by pride, punishment, comradeship, reward, oath, and fear, but not endlessly, not under every commander, not in every crisis, and not while the world around him is changing faster than the institution that trained him. Rome's army is formidable because it turns hardship into routine. Rome's later danger lies in the moment when hardship ceases to be a test of discipline and becomes the permanent condition of an empire asking more from its soldiers than even they can continue to give. Disease makes this truth impossible to conceal. It has always travelled with armies, moving through water, waste, wounds, insects, crowded quarters, spoiled provisions, and the weakened bodies of men exhausted by campaigning. A battle may destroy thousands in a single day, but illness can quietly reduce a force week after week, leaving no glorious field to explain why ranks are thin and morale sour. Roman organisation helps. Camps can be arranged with attention to drainage, waste, water, spacing, and medical treatment. Permanent forts can contain facilities for care. Supply systems can preserve food and bring replacement equipment. But an ancient army does not possess the knowledge or medicines required to control infection reliably. Fever does not respond to a centurion's staff. Dysentery is not shamed into retreat. A man who has marched through cold rain, eaten badly, slept poorly, and opened his skin through blisters or wounds may fail, not because he lacks toughness, but because toughness is no defence against a microscopic enemy no Roman can understand. In the 2nd century of the empire, disease strikes on a scale that shakes the entire Roman world. Beginning during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, the epidemic conventionally known as the Antonine Plague spreads through territories already connected by the very roads, ports, garrisons, trade routes, and military movements that make imperial power possible. Its exact disease remains debated. Smallpox is often proposed, but certainty is impossible from the surviving evidence. Its precise death toll is also uncertain and should not be treated as a simple number carved safely into history. What is not in doubt is that the epidemic is severe, prolonged, and damaging. Armies campaigning or returning from war become possible channels of spread. Garrisons need replacement. Taxpayers, farmers, artisans, labourers, recruits, officers, and families suffer together. The empire's strength has always depended on the movement of people and supplies. Now movement carries loss, carries. A Roman soldier during epidemic does not confront an enemy he can charge. He may be ordered to remain at a post where comrades fall sick around him, where the infirmary fills, where burial details become more frequent, where incoming replacements look increasingly young or poorly prepared, and where rumours travel faster than official explanations. He may watch trained veterans vanish from a unit not in battle, but beneath blankets, delirious and dehydrated, their weapons untouched beside them. The military culture that teaches endurance offers few ways to make sense of such death, except religious appeal, fatalism, duty, or the insistence that the post must still be held. The empire may need the soldier precisely when his own confidence in the order of things is weakest. No single explanation fully accounts for the strains of the later Roman military system, but epidemic disease removes men, weakens economies, interrupts recruitment, and forces the army to perform amid losses no drill can reverse. Pay can become as dangerous as sickness when it fails. A Roman soldier may endure astonishing conditions, but endurance is rarely detached from expectation. He serves for pay, rations, rewards, discharge benefits, status, family security, legal privilege, comradeship, and a sense that his sacrifices are recognised. When emperors or claimants depend upon military support, money becomes a language of loyalty, bonuses at accession, promises during civil conflict, increased pay, gifts. And favours can secure obedience, but they can also teach soldiers that power is negotiable, and that the man willing to reward them deserves their standards. If payment is late or insufficient, if conditions become intolerable, or if commanders are hated, the same men trained to hold a frontier may direct their anger inward. Mutiny is not a strange accident in Roman military history. It is the moment when an army's shared discipline is turned against authority. Shortly after the death of Augustus in the early 1st century, troops on the Rhine and in Pannonia revolt amid complaints of low pay, long service, harsh treatment, and miserable conditions. These are not raw recruits incapable of discipline. They are men whose experience has taught them exactly how much the system has taken from them, and who now believe the bargain has failed. Accounts written by elite authors may frame their behaviour with horror, contempt, or dramatic emphasis, but the underlying grievances are revealing. The soldier who has spent years being told that endurance is honourable can reach a point where continued submission feels less honourable than refusal. Military obedience is powerful because it is collective. Military revolt is terrifying for the same reason. The empire learns repeatedly that troops who make emperors can destroy them. In the year 69 after Nero's death, rival claimants draw armies into civil war in what becomes known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Legion confronts legion. Provincial loyalties, commanders' ambitions, promises of reward, and political uncertainty turn Roman military strength upon itself. The soldiers fighting are not defending Rome from an external enemy. They are deciding, through violence, which Roman leader will command the world they all claim to serve. Towns suffer. Italy sees battle again, and the disciplined capability of the army becomes a civil wound. A legionary trained to stab efficiently does not require a foreign body in front of him. Once political authority breaks apart, he can use the same skill against men wearing versions of the same equipment, invoking the same gods, and speaking the same language of Roman duty. This pattern deepens centuries later, particularly in the 3rd century, when emperors rise and fall with frightening speed, often supported by armies in different regions facing different dangers. The empire is enormous, and its geography becomes an argument against easy command. A general on one frontier may face invasion while receiving too little assistance from a distant emperor. Soldiers who trust the commander beside them more than a ruler far away may proclaim their own candidate. That decision demands military force. Military force provokes rival force, and every civil war consumes trained men, money, supplies, horses, equipment, and attention that might otherwise have defended the borders. Rome's army remains dangerous, but more and more of its danger is aimed at Rome. The frontier itself has become a burden of scale. In the centuries of expansion, Roman soldiers marched outward into territories where victory could produce treasure, slaves, taxes, land, prestige, and the momentum for another campaign. A mature empire faces a different problem. Its borders run along rivers, deserts, mountains, roads, forts, walls, client zones, and unstable political landscapes stretching across distances almost impossible to protect equally at all times. On the Rhine and Danube, groups beyond the frontier shift, combine, raid, negotiate, migrate, serve Rome, resist Rome, and learn from its weaknesses. In the east, powerful states, first Parthian and then Sasanian Persian, confront Rome with resources and ambitions worthy of a rival empire. In North Africa, Britain, the Balkans, Syria, Egypt, and elsewhere, troops must hold routes, suppress revolt, escort supply, defend settlements, police movement, and respond to threats that may erupt far apart from one another. A legion stationed at a frontier fort is therefore part of a structure that can never entirely rest. A raid may not resemble a grand invasion, but it still burns farms, carries off captives, exposes weak defences, and demands retaliation. A garrison sent away to support a civil war leaves a gap someone else may exploit. Mobile field forces can answer crisis more rapidly, but concentrating strength in one place may leave another dangerously thin. Recruiting outside old citizen patterns becomes not a sign that Rome has simply abandoned standards, but a practical response to the scale of need. Soldiers increasingly come from frontier regions, provincial populations, military families, allied or federated groups, and communities whose relationship to Roman identity is varied and changing. The simple image of an Italian legionary spreading Rome outward no longer fits a world in which men born near the borders often spend their lives defending an empire that has become their own home. Later writers, especially those distressed by the changes of their own age, sometimes interpret altered recruitment, equipment, or tactics as evidence that old Roman toughness has decayed. There is a powerful nostalgia in the belief that ancestral soldiers marched harder, dug deeper, obeyed more strictly, and defeated enemies by a character later generations have lost. Some decline in training or supply may occur at specific places and moments. Armies can indeed become poorly led, underpaid, under-equipped, or demoralized, but the claim that Rome simply forgot how to make hard soldiers is too easy. The enemies, economy, politics, disease environment, manpower sources, strategies, and scale of the military problem have changed. A flexible cavalry-heavy threat is not best answered by pretending every battle should resemble one from the age of the Middle Republic. A frontier under repeated raids and civil withdrawals cannot be saved merely by shouting about older discipline. Rome adapts because it must, though adaptation itself can appear like decay to those who believe the past won only by remaining unchanged. The soldier caught inside these transformations may still live a life recognizable to the men who marched centuries before him. He still rises for duty, maintains equipment, bears weight, builds, watches, endures bad food, resents officers, fears disease, misses family, and knows that violence may arrive without warning. But the world supporting him is more unstable. He may receive irregular pay in coin, losing value. He may serve an emperor whose name changes before his enlistment ends. He may be removed from a border to fight another Roman claimant, then return to find the communities he protected damaged in his absence. He may face enemies who have served Rome previously, learned Roman methods, acquired Roman arms, or been invited inside imperial territory under agreements that later fracture under pressure. The old division between Rome and what lies beyond it has become less certain on the ground, even when official language continues to insist upon order. The disaster at Adrianople in 378 reveals how fatal these strains can become. Gothic groups, displaced and pressured by events beyond the Danube, are admitted into Roman territory under circumstances marked by exploitation, hunger, mistreatment, breakdown of control, and rebellion. The story is complex, shaped by migration, imperial administration, military necessity, corruption, and desperation. It is not a simple tale of barbarian hordes suddenly bursting into a healthy empire at Adrianople. The Eastern Emperor Valens engages a Gothic force without waiting for all available support, and the battle ends in catastrophic Roman defeat. Valens dies, and a large portion of his army is destroyed. The event is often treated as a symbol of the end of Roman military superiority, but symbols can mislead. Rome still possesses armies, wins later battles, makes agreements, and continues in the East for centuries. Yet Adrianople demonstrates once more what Cannae had shown long before. Roman training and courage cannot redeem failed judgment, unstable politics, poor intelligence, strategic impatience, and an enemy placed in a position to fight with desperate effectiveness. In the West, the pressures continue to accumulate. Civil wars strip frontiers of forces, rival generals compete, tax bases and political authority fracture in regions subjected to violence. Non-Roman military groups are recruited, bargained with, settled, distrusted, employed, or fought depending on circumstance. Commanders of diverse origins become central to imperial defence, sometimes serving the empire with remarkable skill, even as old Roman categories fail to describe the military world accurately. In 410, Rome itself is sacked by Alaric's Goths, an event emotionally staggering to those who still see the city as the secure centre of history. The sack is not the instant extinction of Roman civilization, nor proof that every soldier has ceased to be effective. It is a sign that the Western state can no longer reliably convert its military traditions into uncontested protection of its symbolic heart. By the 5th century, the Western imperial court continues to rely upon armies, generals, alliances, and military labour, but its capacity to command resources consistently weakens. Provinces slip from effective control. Taxation fails in places where soldiers are still urgently required. Generals fight political rivals while external powers take root. Rome does not fall because one generation of soldiers becomes soft, nor because a single foreign people discovers a magical weakness in the legion. The end is more exhausting and more human than that repeated civil conflict. Altered economic structures, regional fragmentation, contested legitimacy, migration and settlement under pressure, disease and demographic uncertainty, military dependency on powerful commanders and outside forces, and the simple impossibility of defending every claim of a vast state when the centre can no longer guarantee enough trust. Money, men, or time. Even in this final Western unravelling, soldiers continue to be brave. They still stand at posts, ride patrols, repair walls, obey commanders, betray commanders, fight for pay, fight for family, fight for ambition, and die for political structures that may already be disappearing around them. The failure of an empire is not the same thing as the cowardice of its troops. A man may hold his section of wall perfectly while the system required to supply, reinforce, and justify that wall has already begun to collapse elsewhere. The Roman army had always taught individuals that their survival depended upon staying within the formation. In the end, the formation of the Western Empire itself no longer holds. The old camp at night returns as an image, but now its meaning has changed. For centuries, Roman soldiers arrive in dangerous country and dig a boundary between order and threat. They build a perimeter, post guards, assign spaces, preserve food, protect standards, and make mourning possible, but no ditch can encircle an entire failing political world. No rampart can keep out disease, unpaid loyalty, civil ambition, broken taxation, frontier upheaval, corrupt administration, or the exhaustion of defending too much with too little. The soldier can still drive his tool into the soil. He can still raise a wall before darkness. He can still obey. What he cannot do is make the empire behind him worthy, stable, solvent, united, and capable of giving his endurance a lasting purpose. Rome's trained men were never gods. They were the most disciplined answer a human state could create to danger, distance, and fear. For a very long time, that answer was enough to terrify the world. But when the threats multiplied within and without, when the army was compelled to fight for competing Romes while also defending a vast frontier, even men conditioned to endure the unbearable found themselves standing inside problems no sword, shovel, oath, or punishment could solve. Long after the Western Empire has broken apart, the Roman soldier continues to march through imagination. He appears on screens, in paintings, in museum displays, in schoolbooks, in games, in monuments, and in the language people use whenever they want to describe discipline made visible. His shield is clean, his armour catches the light, his ranks move in near-perfect lines, and his face often bears the expression of a man untouched by uncertainty. Behind him stretches the simplified promise of Rome train men harder than anyone else, make them obey without hesitation, give them roads, camps, engineering, and weapons, and they will grind every enemy beneath a system more powerful than courage alone. There is enough truth in that picture to make it seductive. Roman armies could be brutally effective. Roman soldiers did march across distances that broke bodies, build under conditions that seemed impossible, recover from disasters that should have destroyed political will, and impose military control over an enormous part of the ancient world. But the polished figure leaves too much out. The Roman soldier was never terrifying because he stopped being human. He was terrifying because Rome became extraordinarily skilled at discovering what human beings could be made to do before they broke, and at replacing, punishing, rewarding, or remembering them when they did. The word monster suggests something born outside ordinary limits, something without the vulnerabilities shared by other men. Yet the legionary begins as a vulnerable body. He arrives with soft feet that blister, muscles unaccustomed to military loads, private loyalties that compete with duty, and an instinct for self-preservation no oath can simply erase. He may be a citizen called from a farm, a poor volunteer seeking a future, an Italian ally serving a power that has not yet made him equal. An auxiliary recruited far from Rome, a frontier-born soldier inheriting military life from family and place, or a man caught inside one of the many emergencies in which the state lowers old distinctions, because it needs bodies more urgently than it needs ideals. He's not born beneath a standard. The standard must be made to matter to him. The shield must become more important than the impulse to drop it. The unit must become a source of identity strong enough to keep him near danger. The commander, pay chest, discharge promise, gods, comrades, punishments, and memories of those already dead must all gather around him until movement forward becomes more imaginable than refusal. The transformation begins in the smallest humiliations, a load carried badly, a pace not maintained, a shield lowered, an order misunderstood, a veteran's contempt, an officer's correction. The aching realization that what seemed like strength in civilian life means little on the training ground when every movement must be repeated beneath weight and scrutiny. Before he can frighten an enemy, the recruit is taught to fear failure among his own. He learns that military life is a world of witnesses. Someone sees whether he digs his share, cleanses equipment, stands his watch, holds his place, shares hunger without making himself a burden, and remains present when a man nearby is wounded. The army claims the body not only through command but through the gaze of companions. A soldier becomes reliable partly because he cannot bear to be known as otherwise. That is why comradeship and cruelty live so closely together in Roman military power. The men beside a soldier may save his life. They may carry him when sick, share food when rations are thin, shield him in a confused fight, help repair his equipment, remember his family, and stand near him through experiences no one outside the ranks could fully understand. They may also mock him, report him, punish him, or kill him if the army declares his failure a betrayal of them all. The unit offers belonging on the condition of usefulness. It is a harsh kind of love, if love is the word, but it can be remarkably strong. A man who no longer believes in distant politicians may still remain loyal to the faces around his cooking fire. A veteran who has little trust in the promises of the Republic or Emperor may still refuse to abandon the standard under which his dead companions once stood. This is the part of Roman training that no equipment display can reproduce. The famous weapons matter. The shield protects, the sword kills, the javelin disrupts, the helmet and armour purchase moments of survival. But objects do not explain why a man lifts them again after seeing what battle does. Roads matter, camps matter, bridges matter, granaries matter, medical treatment matters, cavalry and auxiliaries and engineers matter, and the entire supporting society of the army matters. Yet all of them converge upon a demand placed inside the soldier: continue. Continue after the road has opened the skin of the feet. Continue after rain has ruined sleep. Continue when the food is poor. Continue when the camp must be dug before eating. Continue after the post has made the arm numb. Continue when punishment has shown what hesitation costs. Continue when a commander has failed. Continue after friends are missing from the line. Continue after victory has revealed itself to be a field of mutilated bodies rather than a clean moment of glory. The phrase "trained like monsters" therefore contains its own hidden indictment. Rome's soldier may look monstrous to the enemy because he appears again after defeat, because he builds walls out of exhausted soil, because he crosses barriers believed to be safe, because he keeps his formation where another army breaks, because his violence is delivered not as a single burst of fury, but as a practiced occupation of land and life. To the village watching a Roman column approach, to the defenders inside a besieged settlement, to families whose grain becomes supply and whose sons become captives or corpses. Roman endurance is not admirable discipline in the abstract. It is disaster arriving in ordered ranks. The soldier's suffering does not cancel the suffering he helps impose. A man can be exploited by the institution above him and still be terrifying to the people beneath its advance. Roman histories written by victors naturally make space for fortitude, duty, courage, and greatness. Those qualities are real. It would be dishonest to reduce Roman soldiers to unwilling victims or mindless instruments. Many take pride in service, many pursue honour, wealth, advancement, citizenship, revenge, security, companionship, or a life that seems more meaningful beneath arms than outside them. Some genuinely love the army that consumes their youth. Some become its fiercest enforcers. Some grow old by its roads, settle near its forts, raise children in its shadow, dedicate altars to the gods who preserved them, and arrange tombstones naming the units to which they gave much of their lives. Rome does not maintain an empire for centuries merely by beating unhappy men forward. It provides enough reward, enough identity, enough victory, and enough belonging to make the hardship meaningful to many who perform it. But meaning does not make the cost vanish. Beneath the titles and military decorations lie men whose names are lost, men killed in actions no author describes, men buried beside frontier roads, men who limp through retirement, men whose families never see promised rewards, men who serve in units destroyed because a commander misjudges terrain, or ambition outruns caution. There are allied Italians whose service strengthens a state that withholds equality until rebellion forces change. There are auxiliaries who spend decades defending distant borders for the possibility of citizenship. There are recruits absorbed into civil wars where Rome's finest discipline becomes a weapon for Roman men to murder one another. There are soldiers who survive foreign enemies only to die of fever in a crowded camp, or to be abandoned by a political order too fractured to pay and support those it still expects to obey. Even the empire's most admired military virtues carry a dark reflection. The camp is security, but it is also the daily evidence that men are never allowed simply to be exhausted. The march is mobility, but it is also pain disciplined into usefulness. The oath is belonging, but it is also surrender. The practiced sword is preparation, but it is also the slow removal of hesitation before killing. The standard is identity, but it can bind a man to a commander leading him against his own countrymen. Punishment protects the group, but it may require companions to crush a terrified man beneath clubs. Reward recognizes sacrifice, but it can teach armies to follow whoever promises the richest payment. The same system that saves Rome after Cannae helps break the Republican civil war. The same frontier army that shields communities can elevate rivals, withdraw protection, or turn provinces into battlegrounds for imperial claims. What survives in the record suggests that Roman soldiers understood many of these contradictions, even when they lacked the luxury to speak about them in the way later ages might wish. Their letters ask for ordinary comforts. Their equipment is repaired rather than magically perfect. Their bones show injuries and strain. Their tombstones record service with pride, grief, and formality. Their forts grow into living settlements because no man can remain only a weapon across decades of posting. Their mutinies reveal that they knew when demands exceeded reward. Their loyalty to commanders reveals that recognition in danger may matter more than distant constitutional ideals. Their rebellions and civil wars reveal that disciplined men are never politically neutral once they understand their collective strength. The Roman soldier's greatest achievement may not have been that he fought well in a particular formation, carried a certain sword, or wore a famous kind of armour. It was that he became part of an institution capable of making survival, labour, movement, violence, and rebuilding continuous across generations. A legionary killed in one war does not end the system. His place is filled, his methods are taught, the fort remains, the road extends, the standard is lifted again. Rome turns mortality itself into a problem of replacement and memory. That capacity is magnificent in its organisation and horrifying in its consequences. It allows a city on the Tiber to outlast enemies who defeat it, absorb communities that resist it, carry war far beyond Italy, and create a military world whose ruins still line the landscapes of Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Yet the army cannot ultimately escape the truth imposed upon every soldier from the first march onward. Endurance has limits. The body fails, the formation fails, loyalty divides, supply breaks, disease enters, fear wins, the commander proves unworthy, the state asks for sacrifice it can no longer reward, the borders grow too broad, the political centre too unstable, the civil wars too consuming. The lesson Rome once taught its recruits returns upon the empire itself. No one stands forever merely because he has stood for a very long time. Still, there is a reason the Roman soldier remains compelling. He brings the scale of empire down to the size of a human back beneath a pack, a human hand around a tool, a human foot in a worn sandal, a human throat swallowing fear before a line moves forward. Empires can appear abstract when seen only through maps and rulers. The legionary denies that abstraction. He reminds us that Roman power had to be carried, step after step, by people who were hungry when hungry, cold when cold, afraid when death approached, and capable of cruelty and tenderness within the same life. The empire's roads are famous, but someone suffered to build and walk them. Its forts are impressive, but someone spent years watching from them. Its victories are celebrated, but someone had to enter the small violent space behind a shield and do what victory required. So the men behind the monster remain more troubling than the monster itself. A fantasy creature can be admired or condemned from a safe distance. A human being trained into terrible effectiveness demands a harder recognition. Rome did not need an army of inhuman giants. It needed men ordinary enough to feel every wound and disciplined enough to continue despite them. Men capable of friendship, fear, greed, loyalty, obedience, anger, pride, and exhaustion. Men who could be shaped by repeated demands until the world experienced their vulnerability not as weakness, but as force. By the time darkness falls over another temporary camp, the Empire may be young or old, Republican or Imperial, expanding or failing. The soldier at the trench edge does not yet know what later historians will call his age. He only knows the ache in his shoulders, and the tool in his hands, the presence of other men working beside him, and the boundary of earth slowly rising between their bodies and whatever waits outside. He's not a monster. He's tired. He's afraid. He has been taught to keep digging. Long after the last command has faded, after the standards have fallen or been carried into other wars, after the roads have cracked and grass has spread across the outlines of forts, the earth remains quiet over the places where Roman soldiers once worked and waited. In a field, a shallow line marks a camp no traveller now needs. Beneath a northern rain, leather darkened by centuries rests where a foot once pressed through mud. In the ruins of a frontier settlement. A small shoe reminds the living that war was never occupied by soldiers alone. Somewhere beneath ploughed soil lies a bent nail from a marching sandal, a fragment so small that it seems almost absurd beside the scale of the empire it helped to carry. Rome is gone in the way all powers eventually go, not vanished without trace, but changed into ruins, languages, laws, roads, arguments, inherited memories, and stories repeatedly retold because later ages still recognise something unsettling in them. The legionary endures within those stories because he stands at the meeting point between greatness and cost. He represents what disciplined human beings can build, survive, and achieve together. He also represents what they can be compelled to do to others, and what an ambitious state can demand from the people who give it strength. The soldier himself seldom knows the full meaning of the world he's helping to create. He does not see centuries ahead. He does not know whether the camp he raises will be found by archaeologists, whether the road he repairs will outlast the government that ordered it, whether his name will be carved on stone or erased entirely. He knows the present, the ache of the march, the smell of wet wool and smoke, the grain waiting to be ground, the sentry call in darkness. The familiar voices of men beside him, the uneasy silence beyond the rampart. He knows that morning will come too soon, and that the burden will have to be lifted again. Perhaps that is the final truth behind Rome's feared soldiers. Their power was never that they escaped the fragility of being human. It was that they carried that fragility forward, day after day, under discipline powerful enough to turn fear into formation, fatigue into labour, and ordinary lives into the machinery of history. Yet history, in the end, is gentler and crueler than any commander. It keeps no army forever. It leaves the weapons without hands, the forts without watchmen, the roads without marching columns, and the names of most men beyond recovery. Only the ground remembers in its own silent way. A ditch fills slowly, a sandal decays, rain falls where a sentry once stood awake against the dark, and beneath the grass, the last trace of an exhausted soldier remains exactly where he left it, on the road to a Rome he believed would continue forever.